Good evening, good evening, good evening. Welcome to another Wednesday night Toy Talk. And I appreciate that everybody was enjoying doing streams on a Wednesday and just kind of hanging out and just chatting toys. So tonight, my guest he's well known in the G.I. Joe community. He was the global brand development manager for G.I. Joe. Before that, he was same title for Transformers. And little known fact, he was also a sports radio anchor. But all the way from What's on Joe Mind, I can't say it as well as Mike does, but I'm pleased to have the Honcho himself, Mark Weber.
What's up?
How you doing, sir?
Hey, man, I'm America's house guest. I'm glad to be invited anywhere. So
yeah, you said that last night. I thought that was great.
Just as long as there's food, if there's snacks, I'm there. So.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, I'll email you some snacks.
The spread in the green room was incredible.
Oh, it's fantastic, right?
Yeah, a little spicy for me, but that's all right.
We'll get only the best for you, sir. How's everything going?
Good. It's my favorite season, soccer season. So we're moving along out here in Rhode Island. My kids go to a very small high school, and my son's a senior, my daughter's a freshman, and they have a co-ed high school team, so they get to play on the same team for 1 year. So it's pretty cool to be able to only go to one game and see them both play. So I'm looking forward to that. And again, I grew up in Oregon. I'm more comfortable cold than hot. So anytime we can get further away from the summer, it's good by me.
Oh, I hear you. I'm an East Coast kid, like tri-state, kind of bounced around Brooklyn, New Haven, Connecticut, et cetera, et cecetera. Born in Manchester, but very much a tri-state New England kind of kid. And somehow I live in the desert Southwest.
Right. Well, I did 15 years in Arizona. So I earned my desert stripes, but
that's right. Because school and sports radio anchor, right?
Yeah. I started at, I went to a junior college in Oregon, but then transferred to Arizona State. And that's where I got my broadcasting degree and was a producer. And I wasn't the Skip Bayless or anything running the show, but I was the update anchor every 20 minutes. So we want to try, taking the same Cardinals loss from the day before and writing it a different way every 20 minutes. Because people usually listen to sports radio in like 15 to 40 minute increments. So, it's not too hard to write it different 3 times, but there are guys who have it on at their desk or in their house or wherever all day. So if your 6:20 update is repeated verbatim at 9:40 because nothing changes in the morning, right? They immediately think, oh, come on. It feels like a He-Man cartoon at that point, right? Like, I think I saw this before.
Yeah. Did I see the same story before?
Yeah. He's going to turn Cringer into Battle Cat. It'll be the same damn animation we saw yesterday.
Yeah. He's going to throw that mountaintop. He's going to do that laugh.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. Even as a kid, I remember, because the concept of He-Man wasn't bad, I didn't think. But I remember watching the animation and as a kid going, wow, they cut a lot of corners here.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, especially with all their rotoscoping stuff.
Yeah. So, I'll take shots at He-Man now and then. That's a big one that I'm willing to throw some darts at.
Well, we got some people hanging out with us, and a couple were already waiting for us before we started. So we got Christopher Stormbringer, Jim Largo from Largo's Lair is here. My good friend from Canada, Brandon R., a.k.a. Santa Brandon, is here. Woodman's here. Matt Rubin's here. And Woodman29 is here. M. Vargo's here. Ritz Murphy's in the house. What's up, dude? He's a fantastic singer, by the way.
Well, he's got one on me. Ooh.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we were at Joe Fest and he did karaoke and he killed it.
Ah, nice.
And all the way from the UK, TJC's here. Payne's Toy Samples is here. And Matt Rubin says 2 nights of the Honcho back to back. Epic.
Yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot of whiteness, but okay.
That's a lot of honcho-ery.
Right? The honchosity will be off.
Honchosity, yeah, we'll go with that. And then Bear 11 Charlie, who is also in the infantry, and he's a mortarman, gives us this very awesome Megaforce quote. You love him in blue, you love him in red, but most of all, you love him in blue.
Right. He gets the Megaforce.
Yeah, he does.
Up for that. There you go.
Ace Hunter thumb kiss.
Deeds, not words, Bear 11. Deeds, not words.
Yeah. And good guys always win, even in 2023. Anthony Romo's here. What is up, my friend? Phil from Treasures from Trigger is here all the way from Japan. So thanks for being here, Phil. Samuel Edwards. Speaking of Megaforce, Gaz, the ultimate Megaforce fan, is here. And Matt Ruben says, if you start seeing honchosity in the What's on Joe Mind chat, it's not my fault.
That's fine. It's not trademarked. You can use it. You can put it on shirts if you want.
Yeah,
I'm
cool.
mad respect for being up in Japan to catch this live, right? Good for you.
Oh yeah. Phil's always around. Very, very cool. So you worked at Hasbro for a long time, and you're one of the guys who's responsible for what I want to say, in my opinion, we all have our own opinions, was that perfect time for me with G.I. Joe, like that 50th anniversary stuff. I love it. I've said it before. I say it all the time. All these figures that you can see behind me whatsoever, they're all moderns. 2007 to what? 2019 ish.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah, ishery. Somewhere around there.
It's hard to pin the exact end of it because it probably just faded for a while.
Yeah, because there wasn't it wasn't like Real American Hero in '94. It's just like, well, here's some retro figures, and I'm like, yeah, that's a 50th anniversary figure. I see. When did you get into G.I. Joe as a kid? Like, I'm sure a lot of people know, but what's your history with the brand?
Well, I mean, if you go all the way back, it would have been 77 or 78 under the Christmas tree. My brother and I, my older brother, 3 years above me, we got it was the Super Joe orange, like transformable plane. But it was made for 12-inch figures, and Super Joe was 8-inch scale, right? Yeah. So he was like hiding in the driver's seat with the steering wheel way above him. But it was cool. It could be a plane, it could be like a sub, it could be a bunch of things. So that was our first bit. But I mean, Super Joe didn't last long, and I don't think we ever got anything beyond that and the bad guy, Darkon or some Darklon. So anyway, so that was the first bit, but it didn't resonate anywhere. Really, right? Nobody's interested in the 8-inch Joe very much. There wasn't any entertainment behind it. So it fizzled, and Star Wars had just hit, right? So everybody my age was Star Wars kid.
Oh, yeah.
And that's where I was from 77 to 82. But then, and I loved Little Army Men. And there was another bit of it up I grew up in the middle of Oregon, Bend, little tiny ski town, no Toys R Us. But we would go up to Portland once or twice a year, about 3 hours north. And there was a really good toy shop, and they had European Army Men. And so they were a little bit bigger than your standard all green Toy Story Army Men. And they were hand painted. So they were gorgeous. And I remember at the time, they cost $1 each, right? And they were all vintage World War II stuff. I think they were called World's Finest. And I remember that was the only thing I would ever save my money for, because money just burned a hole in my pocket as a kid. But I would save up money for that Portland trip to be able to go up to their beautiful display case and go, I want the machine gunner, I want the communications guy, and they had never swastikas, but always Iron Cross. They had Germans in gray. And so I bought some Germans, had a lot of Brits, because it was a British company. And I ate those alive, because when my buddies would break out their bags of Army Men, I'm like, hey, kind of cool, but check this out, right?
Yeah.
And I still have one or two of them, but not a lot. And I didn't have as many as I probably think I did. But that was my first military real collectible experience. And then G.I. Joe hit in 82, and I was hooked. I remember looking at the pegs for the first time and seeing them, and it was the art on the front grabbed me, the articulation once I opened it, right? But the file card on the back, I was just absolutely sold. And that's what I loved about the very beginning, the launch of G.I. Joe, and what I got from the comic book as well, is that it didn't pander at all. Right. No. It talked about stuff I had no idea what it was. And in the comic, they give you the little asterisk and explain.
This is what the acronym means.
Yeah. And I love that bit. So I felt like I learned about the real military, or realer than I had experienced as a 9-year-old. But I was just completely in. And so the first year, my brother collected a little bit, but he was 3 years older. So I was 9, he was 12. He was about done. But when the second year came out, it became clearly apparent that I wasn't going to get all that stuff on my own. And my buddy Eric was a year older than me down the block, and we conspired together to combine the collections, that between the two of us, we could cover the bigger toys from Christmas and birthdays, and we would never ask for the same thing, right? We would plan it out, and then we would rotate the collection back and forth every couple of weeks. And I found out later from my mom that all the parents were terrified that this was going to meet a terrible end. Like I would break his Mobat, or he would lose my Hal, but we took really good care of the stuff, and we collected together for 3 years. And then when I was a 5th grader and he was a 6th grader, I did his paper route for a month in the summer when he was on vacation. And that was like $40 back in 85, right? That was some serious kid money. Right. And he came back, he was aging out of it, and he owed me $40. And he said, hey, Mark, instead of the $40, how about you just keep my half of the Joes? And I'm like, done, I'm in. So before you know it, I had inherited his half, and then collected up through about 89, got out of it about 89 or so. We'd cherry pick a guy on the shelf once in a while that was just couldn't let him go. But was pretty much out of it. And then when I graduated college, Arizona State in 98, I got some of that relaunch through Toys R Us, had a little disposable income, and then eBay hit, and I backfilled a ton of the stuff that I had missed. And I'm still backfilling a little bit today, but I like to think that I don't have everything, but I have almost everything I want. Yeah. So there's just little things here and there that I'm still working on. But that was my love affair with G.I. Joe. Like it never ended. I collected the comics all the way through. And then, worked in sports radio, transitioned into toys, did a decade at McFarlane Toys, running their sports picks, helping on their Dragons. I inherited their military line at one point, which was cool. Right. And then the door opened at Hasbro, and it was for a G.I. Joe position, but I applied for it, and they had a sudden urgent opening on Transformers. Right. And that was a more important brand to them at the time. And so they put me on Transformers, which I did for 2.5 years, ran their Generations line up through the Combiner Wars year. And then they had an opening on G.I. Joe, and they knew I was a Joe guy. And Joe there had been, this was right after the second movie.
Retaliation?
I came in after Retaliation. And for years, man, maybe 15 years on Joe, other than Daryl DePriest, who ran it for a long time, then did Star Wars, then came back to it. The level below where I was, where Emily is now, was a way station. People got started there because they didn't have another spot for them, or they got moved there. Hasbro really likes lateral movement. Try things, try a different thing. And sometimes it's great. New eyes, new voice on a brand. But I would dare say there was nobody that wanted to be on G.I. Joe at that level for about 15 years. So I was thrilled to be there. Yeah, exactly. Now, that it's not always good, right? And I'm an honest guy. So I'm not just here to tetherball Hasbro. But sometimes, and the line isn't completely political correct, but if you put a guy who loves Transformers on Transformers, sometimes it's like putting the fat kid in charge of the candy, right? Right. And he's like, oh, we need to make a new X-Brawn. He was my favorite. You're like, yeah, he's like a 5th level character. Nobody's really clamoring for that guy other than you. So it can be really valuable, and sometimes it can be dangerous. So, but for all the MBA kids who aren't, could be working at General Electric and be just as happy as working at Hasbro, the path up is to run some boys brands, make sure to run some girls brands, work in games, work in US marketing, and now you've kind of touched all 4 bases and you're promotable. Yeah. So it does give them better, well-rounded candidates to move up, but it also slows down the progression. Right. So they don't have too many people ready for promotion at the same time. So I always thought you could tell the difference between a brand manager that actually cared about their IP. And there were plenty of people there, friends of mine, who didn't care beans about toys, but they were talented and they did a really good job. But I still think if you care about it, it's going to come out in the product. And I worked on Transformers and I worked on G.I. Joe and a bunch of the other Hasbro Universe brands they wanted to get off the ground, Mask and Micronauts and Action
ROM
Man,
and all that. Yeah.
ROM, all that stuff. That was all under Daryl's umbrella and under
because you worked on that
mine
universe.
as well. Yeah, but they never really got any of those other ones off the ground, other than, ironically, Stretch Armstrong, which got kicked around for like 6 years.
Because you guys did that Revolution set for San Diego Comic-Con.
Yeah, that was one of my babies, and it was the real ask on it. I think it's common knowledge, but basically it was, we have trademarks we need to protect. So we need to put out product using these trademarks, and San Diego product counts. So it was a really easy way to lock up a whole bunch of names in one set. So that was the entire push behind it. Was we want to lock up trademarks, and then it was my job to try to make it compelling and cool enough,
right?
People would go.
And that kind of goes back to learning from your mistakes. Like when they lost Baroness and they had to do Chameleon for a hot minute, and then they got Baroness back, and it's like, okay, we need to learn this stuff. Like Stalker is now Sergeant Stalker, and Flash is now Sergeant Flash, and obviously we all know the deal with the. I almost said Iron Grenadier, but the Steel Brigade.
Steel Brigade.
We all know the deal with that, right?
Yeah.
So
and
Steel Brigade, the Steel Battalion, the Steel Corps.
Yep. And I worked with Bobby we worked on one thing together. We worked on that the Cobra missile system for San Diego. So one thing we got to work on together, and he and I got along great, still do. But it was no shock to me when he waited and pounced on Steel Brigade, because that was always his favorite figure.
Yeah.
Never met anybody who
liked guy.
Yeah, never met anybody who liked Steel Brigade more than Bobby Valla.
Yeah. And he took it and he ran with it, and now it's part of his Action Force universe, and he's doing great stuff with it. So Just Jeff just got here, Denny Geek just got here, and George Aiken all the way from the UK just got here. And George Aiken said they didn't introduce file cards for the UK Action Force until '83. Before that, it was just 3.75, the Action Man. Mm-hmm. So you were talking about a lot of British stuff. Do you get into the Palatoy Action Force stuff, or did you at all?
I didn't at the time. Like, I didn't in Oregon with no internet. I had no idea that stuff was going on. It is where I think my collection will probably go. Once I get a little more disposable income. Kids are expensive. The bummer is, if you're collecting retro, it's getting more expensive every year, right? To get that vintage stuff. So I think where I'm going to try to go next, and who knows when that starts, is I really want to get into the Action Force vehicles that were unique to Europe. The stuff that's 3 3/4 scale that
like
wasn't. Yeah, I mean, the Roboskull's the archetype, right?
Sure.
But there's lots of stuff. There's a sub, and I'm not as well versed as I need to be. I need to read Patty Lennon's book more often, right? But they made stuff that was unique to their line that would work with my Joes, right? Like that.
Sea Lions and
the Sea Lions. Yeah. That's the kind of stuff that'll be next for me. But do I have any? No, not really. No. Yeah. And I'm a big Steeler guy. Steeler's one of my favorite Joes.
Right.
And so I'd love to get that Mobat and the red helmet.
The Mobat and the Steeler with the red visor and stuff.
Yep.
Yeah.
That'll probably be first when I actually make that pounce, but that's a ways off.
Yeah. And that's an interesting thing, because you and I are pretty much on the same track. Got out of Joe right about the same time. You came back a lot earlier than I did, but as I've been ending what I need from 82 to 94, I hit all those big ticket items. I don't want to call them grails, because I think the term grail should be singular. Like this, I've completed my quest, and some Joe people will say there's 3 grails, when I don't think the vernacular works. But as I started reaching the end, I was like, well, I'm going to start dipping my toe into Action Force, and somebody hooked me up with a Roboskull that was being sold on a UK eBay, and I got that, and then a couple other pieces here and there, and I got the AF7 Jeep, and then I got the Sea Lion, and George Aiken's actually helped me with a lot of the stuff in my collection. Then I got a Shadow Track, and so I've been sort of eking my way into the vehicles. I have the the Z Force ATC. I have the Z Force Mobat. I do have the Wolverine. So I'm getting there, but it's just like you said, it's one of those things. It's a challenge.
Well, and that ATC is amazing, right?
It's so good. That's talk about improving upon a great design.
Right. It's so much better than its cousin, right? So that one's on the list for sure. But yeah, you're a little ahead of me, but I think we're on the same track basically.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you know, a lot of that again, it's thanks to guys like George Aiken and Scuba Pete and stuff. And Curb Stomp's here. What's up, buddy? So I think you already talked about almost everything that I had notes for.
I mean, I didn't want to correct you, but it's funny when you say I spent a long time at Hasbro, it felt like it in a good way because I loved every bit of it.
Right.
In truth, it was a little more than 5 years. Like I wasn't there as long as I wanted, and it was the constant delays of the Joe movie that eventually led them to go, you know what, we don't really need a guy preparing lineups for movies that aren't getting made. And I got that, but I was really, really disappointed they didn't remember the really good work and the really profitable work that I'd done on Transformers. Yeah. So that was kind of a bummer, the fact that I felt like I got lost in the wash a little bit. But I mean, you prepare toy lines 2 years in advance, right? So by the time, like my biggest claim to fame, the biggest number on my resume is Combiner Wars for Transformers in the Generations line. That over a 2-year span, I raised the Generations total profits 900%. That's a great number. I don't have a lot of numbers on my resume, but that's a good one.
900%.
Yeah. But the bummer was I moved to Joe in September, and that first Combiner War toy didn't come out till the following January.
Right.
So by the time they came out and they hit and they were really popular, and because they were modular and we were able to share tooling, they were also really affordable for us to make. And so, but it was a brand new brand manager on Joe. So when they're like, wow, the Generation stuff is really blowing up. And they're like, yeah, you know, I'm going to make up a name. Jerry McTaggerson is really killing it on Transformers. And I'm like, yeah, Jerry's been there like 4 months. You'll see his or her input in about a year and a half.
Right. Yeah. You're like, well, Tuffy Tuffington hasn't been there long enough. So
yeah. And the funny part was the designers that I was working with on Transformers, one of them, John Warden, who's a Joe legend, they liked working with me. So I stayed, not by design, but I was still making Transformers decisions years after leaving the brand.
Yeah.
Because they would come to me and say, what do you think, Webb? And I would collaborate with them. That was one of the things I really enjoyed. And one of the things that's a little bit rare with marketing types is having that sync with the design crew. And I loved doing that. I like to think I'm a designer at heart with limited skills. And so being able to work with John and with Lenny and with Bill Rawley and it was that was my favorite part of it was, and being able to work with really limited item count, right? I like to think especially for my time on Joe, coming from Transformers, where they would get like over the whole brand, they'd get like 200 items a year. And then I moved to Joe and I'd get 4. and then midway through development, Daryl would be like, yeah, Nerf took one of our 4 items. I'm like, Nerf has 250 items. They need 251 more
happens, right?
More. You take one from us, you just took a quarter of our line, right?
Yeah, and that's a big chunk.
Yeah. So we were always fighting for item count, and that was I think I was the right guy for that job at that time because I was having to try to find what guys can we re-release that the fans will actually want, right? Like putting 2 Zombie Vipers together in a 2-pack. Because there were never enough Zombie Vipers.
The Cobra Viper and the Iron Grenadier.
Right.
Yeah, and that's something I was going to talk to you about too.
Yeah, well, and that came after the year that they had Heat Viper with Blowtorch, right?
Yeah.
And everybody ended up with 3 to 8 Blowtorches they didn't need, right?
Yep.
And so I don't want to take credit for an idea that basic, but
I actually have several of the yellow and red Blowtorches and the green one actually.
Yeah,
but, because of that Heat Viper situation, I have several of them just kind of around, and I love Blowtorch, but
but
it was a brilliant idea to put Army Builder and Army Builder in a 2-pack versus named character in Army Builders.
I
So
just
yeah,
couldn't
that
believe
was so smart.
I couldn't believe nobody had done it before, right? And then putting Snake Eyes versus Storm Shadow in a 2-pack. Yeah, right? Like, I don't want to take too much credit for any of that because it's so basic, and yet it wasn't being done, right? But by the same token, when I joined the Joe brand, Larry answered a letter in the Joe comic, and somebody said, "How come you draw the guys like you did in the '80s? You know, in modern day combat situations?"
Right.
And he said, "I draw what I know. Hasbro hasn't sent me toys in ages." And I'm like, "How'd you lose Larry's address? Come on now." So that was something we restarted up. I hope they're still doing it now. He got one of everything, right? Just anytime when we were making our orders, send me one for Larry, and then I'll send him a box of the whole year's stuff, and just stuff that, you know, I'm proud that I did it, but it's hard to take a lot of credit for it because it just seems like such no-brainer stuff.
Yeah, but
Troop builders together, right? And
you could have been that guy if you got in a time machine and went back to 1978. You could have been that guy at Kenner that was like, why don't we do like a 3-pack of Stormtroopers?
right? Exactly.
You could have been that guy.
Well, might be cool. I don't know, right? Like,
or how come we don't have like a 2-pack of Rebel Fleet Troopers?
Right. Or the guy on Transformers in '86 who goes, maybe we don't have to kill the whole cast, right? Maybe we just put out a new Optimus next year, right? Like, instead of having Hot Rod kill him. What do I know?
Yeah. So our good friend Pericles Dragon Ball is in the house, and Matt Rubin says, it amazes me that Mark had so few item count to use, but still managed to get new characters. Like, So, anywho,
you don't like those guys?
No, but everyone's trashing my notes. So you debuted Tombstone, and I know in an interview, and I was actually going to bring this up. It's in my notes. It was right after worked on Hasbro Universe with Daryl DePriest, post G.I. Joe Retaliation movie, 50th anniversary line, Tombstone. Right. So now we're to that point. Yes, thank you, Matt Rubin. You said that you have a love-hate thing with Tombstone.
Yeah.
Do you want to expand on that?
Yeah. Well, I'm a huge fan, and I gave I've given the current Joe team some hassle online, but some credit very recently, because it drives me nuts that there hasn't been more new characters, right? Because I was dying to make new characters when I got on the brand. Same thing with Transformers, because the best part of being a young G.I. Joe fan when a Real American Hero was new, before the internet, right? Way before the internet. Was finding that first figure of the year on the pegs and flipping him over and looking at all the art, all the thumbnails for the other guys, and seeing what am I gonna get this year, or what's the new batch, right? And
what's the deal with this guy in white?
Yeah, and then after year 3, year 4, you start to get a new Snake Eyes or a new whatever. Fine,
sure.
Play the hits. There's nothing wrong with that, but you were still getting 20, maybe 30 new characters every year. It was a lifeblood of the line, Transformers and G.I. Joe both. And so I wanted to get some new guys out there. And one of the things I really wanted to do, other than, no offense to Lieutenant Claymore, but Cobra hadn't had much ethnic diversity at all in the history of their even their rank and file, right? But certainly not their upper leadership. So I wanted somebody who was important. And we were doing 2-packs that were kind of rivals at that point. So I wanted a Cobra to essentially be their Duke, to be their field commander. Yeah, because it felt like they never really had that guy, right? The guy leading the troops on the field. Right. So I wanted to make that guy. But my pitch was that I didn't want him to be the typical scarred, ruined bad guy, right? Because so many, even within Cobra, are masked or scarred or eye patch or whatever.
Right.
And I said, I want this guy to be haughty. I want him to be vain. The line I used was, I want the guy who will blow up the Hoover Dam and wait for the news choppers to arrive, right? And make sure they get his good side. I wanted him. And the funny thing was, this was a couple years before the Black Panther movie came out. But what I wanted was Killmonger, basically.
Right.
A guy who was lethal, who was dangerous, but who was also vain and good looking, right? I wanted that guy. That was the pitch. for Tombstone, and then on his own, the designer gave him a big X scar over one eye, which is exactly the opposite of what I was going for. And the funny bit was when we first showed off the painted sample, they had painted both eyes, and there was no paint on the scar. And
Right.
so at 3 3/4, it kind of just blended in because both eyes were painted. And the very first one we showed off at JoeCon had both eyes painted. And then when it actually came out, the second eye is not painted and the scars more visible. And it's exactly what I didn't want. And it was nice guy. He and I always got along, but it was actually what I didn't want in a partnership with a designer, was having us disagree and it ends up on pegs, right?
Right.
Like,
Because one of you is going to lose.
yeah, and I don't mind. No one likes losing, but if I'm talked out of it because of cost, because of budget, because of whatever, if I know I've lost, I didn't get what I wanted, fine. I'm a good soldier like anybody. I'll get behind it when it comes out, but I don't want to be surprised by what happened. And it was, at the time, design was being done in Burbank while brand management was being done in Rhode Island.
Right.
So if he'd been down the hall, I would have been earlier into it. And even if I'd lost, we would have had a discussion about it.
Sure.
But it's my hope, if they ever make Tombstone again, that they actually make him in the spirit that was intended. He's supposed to be a good-looking guy who knows it.
Right.
And it just isn't what we got. And he's still fine. I'm still proud of him. I'm glad we made him. But and the funny backstory of it was, I had Tombstone as a cleared name through legal from my time on Transformers. I wanted to make, and we were going to wait till after Combiner Wars. I wanted to make a Decepticon that turned into a hearse. And I thought that would have been awesome. We would have named him Tombstone, and he would have been black and gray and creepy. And I just think it would have been really, really killer, an Undertaker kind of Decepticon. But then I got moved off the brand, and I still like that idea, and I still root for Transformers. I'm a Transformers fan too, and I think they've done really good work over the years.
Oh yeah.
But I wanted to save that trademark because I knew it was still clear, and so that's why I used it on my Cobra guy. Was I knew it was already safe, I knew I liked it, and it gave Transformers 6 more years to use it if they wanted. So that was the long tail of Tombstone. And long answer long, Stiletto was from the fan vote, right? From the Kindle World stuff.
Yeah, she was a fan's choice.
Yeah, and Bill Nidro put that together, and there were a lot of good options. But I'm a sucker for Bill's writing. I think he's tremendous. All of his stuff, his show stuff, his Action Force stuff, fantastic writer who gets it. But I was privately, I was rooting for that because I thought it came from the best story. But that vote was 100% legit on the up and up. Whoever won was getting a figure. Had I been there longer and Joe continued, I would have liked to have done some of the other ones, some of the other finalists. But as it ends up being, it was just Stiletto. But I thought she was an outstanding figure.
Oh yeah, she's a fantastic figure and a character. And I have to thank you for Tombstone because he sits up on my Cobra leadership shelf.
There you go.
He's kind of in the 3rd row, but he's up there, and
I mean, he was never
something to be said for new figures.
Yeah, he was never supposed to be the guy, right?
Right.
But yeah, Battlefield Commander. I like that idea for Cobra. Duke's opposite number. Okay, I like that. And some of them weren't brand new, but we got Shooter made, right? I couldn't believe nobody had made Shooter. All those years later.
That was the next one. So the 3 specific figures for the 50th anniversary line: Tombstone, Stiletto, and then the notes that I had associated with the 2 of them. And then, Jody, Shooter, Craig in the Special Forces 3-pack. And I love that 3-pack. That is my favorite version of Outback. I think that he translates the best because he doesn't have the big survival, go climb a rock on his shirt, which I get it. But if you want to talk about like a purpose-driven version of Outback, that Special Forces 3-pack is fantastic. And Shooter. So she actually sits on my shelf with my OG 13 because of the comic.
Yes, she does.
Even though that was based on Jim Shooter, technically, but she is Shooter.
Yeah. Well, and for years I wondered if they would dive into that because it's that unknown Joe, that 6th Beetle almost.
Yeah,
right?
like who was that?
Yeah, and then when I think it was Larry who wrote for DDP that one issue that kind of tells the story of why you didn't ever meet her. And what was cool is, and Larry based a lot of the original Joes off real enlisted people that he served with or knew of. And the first time I met him in person was at a Joe Fest, and he came over to the booth, and I introduced myself. He knew me from getting packages from me, and Larry would send me back sketches as a thank you. Right, anytime I send him a box, I get a sketch back, and I'm like, dude. Larry Hama is writing Mark Webber on an envelope at some point, right? That's
so cool.
I mean, I never lost track of how cool that was. But he came over and said, and we were talking, and he said, and I showed him the shooter figure, and he said, hey, I always appreciate the stuff you send me. It's really helpful to me. And I appreciate you guys remembering me. I did have a request though. And I said, hey, let me know. And he said, could I get a couple extra shooter packs? And it's just a number we put down on a sheet, right? So I'm like, yeah, Larry, it's the only time he ever made a request, at least of me. What do you need? And he said, I'd like 7. I'm like, ooh, now 7's a lot, but it's a big jump, but whatever. Larry Hama, right?
So
7. If he wants 17, I'm down, right? So I put down 7, and then I don't know if he felt sheepish or wanted to explain it, but he said, that he wanted one, and that he wanted one for Jody, and that I think she had 5 sons who are all enlisted or had been enlisted, and so he wanted to be able to send her 6 for herself and for one of each of her boys who all served the country. And I'm like,
yeah, and see, that's super cool right there. You can't say no to that.
Yeah, I mean, do it, right? So I was pretty happy about that. And I don't know if they're still doing it. I hope they are, because if you're doing, like we've talked about it occasionally, I think everybody has, if you're doing the Mount Rushmore of modern Joe, it's pretty much Ron Rudat, in my opinion, Ron Rudat, Kirk Bazoogian, Larry Hama, and Hector Greedo, who sometimes gets forgotten, but good Lord. Yeah. And the art that came after him, or the other guys who did it in his style.
Right.
So there's a reason. And that was one of the things I railed about a little bit with the start of Classified, was even though they've used a ton of different amazing artists, looks kind of rough on the pegs, right?
Yeah,
it doesn't look like one thing. So
yeah, the whole, and I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, at least not yet. And I do want to say to everybody in the chat, if you have questions for Mark, throw them in the chat and I'll star them, and then we'll just get to them all. And there is a super chat that I need to read. That's a question to you, but just kind of touching on what you said, if packaging and art, we talk about Hector Greedo, and Ed Morrow was the one who took it after Hector Greedo, right?
I think so. There were a couple different guys over the years, but
if that's where toys and action figures are at their maximum competition, yes, it's widely known that I don't like Classified, but the visual language, it kind of comes and goes, and it falls in and falls out. And most recently with the last couple of waves, they're doing the black box with the image of the toy, and then they do like that deep cut of the space shuttle or the tube worms or stuff like that, which I think is pretty, wink, it's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
But their packaging varies so much, and I guess they're trying to find their stride or something. But 82 to 94, it didn't matter if it was Supersonic Fighter or Battle Core or whatever, it still had a visual language, and I don't know. I guess I just see it as kind of a missed opportunity.
Yeah, I'm grateful, just on one level, that we're getting away from the closed box packaging. Like, I understand what company was trying to do there, but
sure. But
I shall give them credit for recognizing the error and and changing pretty quick for a big company like that. That's actually pretty fast. It reminds me a little bit of when I was at McFarlane and making 7-inch sports picks. They decided they didn't want to raise the price beyond $10, but they were getting squeezed because the factory prices were going up. And rather than raise the price, they were gonna change the scale and make them 6 inches, and they're almost the same. And I'm like, and I fought so hard against that. And when you've got your guy who only collects Oakland Raiders, right, has 6 Oakland Raiders on his shelf, and if the new guy is an inch short, the worst, it was the first line was a retired player, a Cooperstown baseball line, and 5 of them were brand new sculpts in the 6-inch scale, and then one of them was a reused pose. and it was Raleigh Fingers with the most badass mustache ever, right?
Right. Yeah.
He was bent over delivering a pitch, but he was on a mound, so he was automatically taller than the rest of the line, doubled over.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, this is going to be a problem. And
Yeah,
sure enough,
that's when you're looking at them all. That's where people start losing it.
yeah, and you don't want to give a collector who spends serious money, you don't want to give them a reason to get out, right?
Right.
Because there's a chunk of guys who will say, you know what, now my collection is just 7-inch guys, right? And so I'm done. I don't need any of that new stuff. And so you want to be really careful not to offend. It's a brutal term, right? But Topps uses it internally. The whales, right? The people who donate a ton of their income to this.
No, it's
they
absolutely true.
They are closer to quitting than you would think, because of the money that's being poured into it. So you got to be really careful. Now, I'm not saying you have to pander to the diehards,
right?
But you because that's a mistake too. But you have to be careful not to consciously offend them or give them a reason to get out, right? Like Magic the Gathering just put out the One Ring card, right, where there's only one of them. Cool concept, right? But how many guys who had one of everything or almost everything when that came out, how many of those massive, deep-pocketed, huge wallet-spent collectors did they just go, you know what, we don't need them anymore?
Yeah, and that's
because there can be only one, right?
Yeah, and that's the balance. Like you said, you don't want to kick the whales out, and a lot of collectors are they are that one decision away from being like, I'm just gonna go back to Real American Hero 82 to 94, or I'm going to put my focus on the dark years, what was it, 97 to 2006, or they've always got a reason to pivot or change or, look to something else like, oh, I'm going to go from classified to Valaverse Action Force. And
right. Yeah. Or they like, that's a good example. They have something that's their B collection, right?
Yeah.
Like I don't collect Star Wars except for Power of the Force 90 to 94 figures.
Yeah,
that may become their big new thing if G.I. Joe pisses them off, right? Or not just Joe specific, but whatever main brand, right? If Ninja Turtles makes me mad, I could just as easily be a Fortnite guy tomorrow.
Yeah, 100%. When the modern Joes ended, when the retro came out. Probably shouldn't have been called retro because everyone expected O-rings, like we've all discussed ad nauseum. But when those ended and they were like, we're not doing modern construction Joes anymore, I was like, okay, well then I'm going to start looking at, even though I already was, I'm going to only look at Marauder Gunrunners, Eagle Force, stuff like that, because you cut me off. And that's okay. It's a business decision, but yeah, I mean, you're going to have collectors that'll pivot and they'll go other places.
Yeah, I was that way with Joe, and I'm a huge Joe fan. But when they went to Sigma 6, I didn't need any of it. Now I wasn't mad at it, and yet this is where I think a lot of people go sideways with it. You probably shouldn't root against it, right? I didn't want Sigma 6 to fail. I actually wanted it to be a big enough hit that they would start making my stuff again too, right? Yeah. Tooling already exists, the easiest thing to do.
Yeah.
So, and as much as I didn't need Sigma 6, the packaging, they had blinking lights on the package to catch your eye, right? Yep. They did some amazing things with that brand. And like we talked about a little bit earlier off air, the decision to go with a different scale and not make it 3 3/4. I would have loved to have been in that room.
Right? I know. And as much as I love that Hiss tank, and we did talk about it backstage before we went live, like the playability of it and the Dragon Hawk and things like that. It's such a unique, VTOL kind of vehicle that looks like an avatar. But those things are rad, but you put them next to your other collection, you kind of have to, it's next to it, but it's off to the side.
Yeah, it's not really part of it. Yeah, it's not really part of it. It can go next to it. It just can't go with it.
Yeah. I got a question for you right here. Brandon R, aka Santa Brandon, sends a Canadian $10 super chat. Thank you, Brandon. Says, why don't they just sell 6-packs of army builders like beer? Yeah. I'm 4 deep in my 6-pack right now, and this is a question I have.
It's a pretty good question for 4 deep, especially if it's Canadian beer.
He types well, yeah, for
Yeah,
Canadian beer.
good for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and even I'll twist it one further. I was pitching when I was on the Joe team, the return of the 7-packs, right? The stuff they would sell mainly online, right? Those Cobra Island 7-packs, and even as a collector and a guy in the toy business at McFarlane, I was like, why are you choosing 7-packs? That seems kind of weird.
Yeah,
but the truth was, and I never worked anywhere where the item count was important the way it was at Hasbro. And that's exactly why they were doing it. I can do 7 figures for 1, right? And even though they reused a lot of tooling because they didn't have an unlimited tooling budget, they could at least get unique paint on each of them.
Right.
Because those 7 guys equates to 1 item count. It's 1 item, it's 1 SKU, it's 1 barcode. So yeah, why wouldn't you do army builders? And they did some of this with Pulse and with some of the Hasbro stuff, or some of the Marvel stuff where they would put Hydra Troopers or AIM Troopers, and you wouldn't have to package them all as much. You could kind of bundle them together in a box, less packaging, maybe sell them at a slight discount over what 3 individual figures would cost. I'm 100% down with that. Absolutely, go wild. I would do that like crazy if I was involved with the Pulse. And I tend to think that they're doing a pretty good job with what they offer, but that would just be evergreen to me for all my brands. Always a 3-pack of Stormtroopers available. Always a 3-pack of Cobra guys together. Always.
It's such a no-brainer. It's kind of, you almost see it as like it's a forest for the trees sort of thing. Like
And Joe, I think, as a property, is absolutely blessed more than any other brand by having the depth of meaningful troop builders, right?
Yes.
Like in Star Wars, you can go Rebel soldiers a little bit, and you can do Stormtroopers all day long, and maybe Snowtroopers a little bit. Biker Scouts, now you're starting to get a little thin.
Right.
But there's so many cool Cobra pretty much all Vipers.
Yeah.
That you could just run forever.
Just any character that has the word Viper in his name, like you just chuck a rock at it. And
I think that was one of the smartest things they did was stop trying to come up with individual code names for every new Cobra trooper.
Oh, look, there's a Laser Viper, and here's an Astro Viper, and done.
Just like that, right? And it automatically, and it tells kids just by the name, oh, I could get a bunch of these, or maybe I should get a bunch of these, right? Like even the guys you absolutely love, like my favorite Cobra is Interrogator. I think he's amazing.
I love Interrogator.
Right? But I only need 1, right? I don't need a bunch of them. But if it was Interrogator Viper, I'd probably need 8, right? To get my interrogation crew together.
Yep.
So
Scrap Iron Viper. Daredevil Dave is here, says I'm late and we need to start over. So I guess we're starting over. That's like the standard comment, like I'm late, start over.
Okay, what did I miss? You can catch it on the replay.
Yep. And then Matt Rubin says, and I was gonna actually say this to you, if they make a classified Tombstone, they should have a scarred head and an immaculate head. But that's a classified thing. Even if they re-release the modern figures again, they could do that. I was gonna say, while you and I were talking and you were talking about Tombstone, and if you said hopefully if they re-release them, I was like, well, if you get a classified one, maybe they'll do you that solid and make them pretty.
I mean, if they actually wrote them into the comic for a while, it'd be a good thing. It'd be like, if you watch the Netflix Punisher series, right? It's like what happens to Billy Russo, right? That he's styling for most of it.
For a minute,
and Frank wrecks him, right? But doesn't kill him because he knows this is more painful, right? So if Tombstone was actually written into the comic as being vain and haughty for 20, 50 issues maybe, and then he gets ruined, like, I'm totally down with that.
Yeah, because then you can expand the story and like go into like what it does to his psyche now that he's all messed up. And it's good drama.
Maybe he goes from being this tactical magician on the battlefield into just having no remorse and no care, right? And what does it do? This is one of my favorite bits in Larry's comic when they introduce Serpentor, and a Cobra Trooper gets shot in front of him, and he goes into fire to drag the guy to safety, and the other Cobras are like, "What are you doing?" And he's like, this is our brother. You're not going to let him bleed out there. And they're like, well, the old boss did it all the time, right? And so that kind of thing where you could flip Tombstone from being a guy that they were all happy to follow, a guy who actually brought Cobra some wins on the battlefield, into a guy that just does not care about his own trooper body count anymore. That could be
goes the way of the Saw Viper.
Yeah, where it doesn't. It was they wrote it in the Hearts and Minds comic that was so good that Max Brooks wrote, where they wrote, I think it was Tripwire, that he had lost his fiance, and that he was a fearless EOD guy because he honestly on some level didn't care anymore, right? He was still
weird death wish.
Yeah, he was a complete tactician, and he would always be as perfect as he could be, but if it goes sideways, like those things sometimes do, cool. It really wouldn't bother him. As long as nobody else got hurt, he still defused the bomb on some level. So you could totally do that. So yeah, I'd be totally down with two heads. That's great.
Very cool. And then all the way from Canada, my good brother Jay Bartlett is here, and good to see you, brother. So thanks for being here, Jay. And I'm just I'm looking for more questions for you. Here's a good one. With all the nostalgia mining and member berries, Hasbro's been doing in the last few years, do you think we'll ever see the Adventure Team Joes make a return?
I think everything's possible. You do have just a brush on it right now. And sometimes you do that if you want to test something that you're not sure about, you let another company make it, right? And I love the stuff that they're doing with the statue dioramas through Diamond Select. And the new Joe Colton, where he's fighting the giant snake with a big Adventure Team logo on his chest. Cool, right? Let's see. That's a great way to just dip your toe in, because it's no skin off Hasbro's nose, right? They hope it sells well because more royalties for more sales. But let somebody else try it and see how it works. I mean, it's no inside baseball to talk about Adventure Team as what they pivoted to when the world was when a big segment of the U.S. was tired of soldiers in war, right? Around the long stretch of the Vietnam conflict. So, without getting into any politics about that, they wanted to do something different. And that's something I always used whenever I had to defend the Joe brand, when lots of people inside Hasbro were like, well, people don't want war toys, right? Or military is not as popular as it used to be. G.I. Joe is a war brand. And I said, really? It's easy to paint it like that because, it has been America's movable fighting man for most of its existence on some level. But if you run the string through all of it, from the original Don Levine 12-inch Joes all the way up through Adventure Team and through Super Joe and through Real American Hero and Sergeant Savage and Sigma 6 and every bit of it, the actual link isn't war, it's courage. And that never goes out of style. So I got to have that conversation a couple times. I really wished I could have had it with more of the higher ups to just go, it's no more war than Star Wars is about war.
Right. It's in the title of Star Wars.
It's about courage.
Sure. And if you're a special mission force, like you're plug and play, you can do all sorts of stuff.
Absolutely.
And that's where I think Adventure Team was smart, because we could go on an adventure and look for this, or we could go to a place where a volcano is about to erupt and we got to save people. And, it was smart. It was smart stuff.
So I got Largo, not to avoid your question. I don't think I'm going to guess it's not a priority for them, but I think they are dipping their toe in the water with that statue, and we'll see where it goes.
Yeah. And we had a bunch more people come in, and Rachel Salinas is here, and she said Storm Shadow had a tiger in Sigma 6. How cool was that?
A giant tiger he could have ridden around. That's even better. So
some other line did something like that. I wonder. And then she says, Mark, I appreciated your contribution to the Joe line, Sightline. Oh yeah, Sightline.
Yeah.
Right? Gary Goggles.
Yeah, and I try to be careful not to take too much credit for that, because I never met Gary. I knew who he was, obviously, because I was a lurker on Joe boards all over the place, but I didn't post very much. I didn't post very much, but
sure.
But I was always reading it. I knew how valuable he was to the community, but I had never met him in person. But that guy, they didn't have a name for, but they had already built the fig. And I looked at him and I'm like, he's covered head to toe. Could be like Spider-Man, right? One of the reasons Spider-Man's so popular internationally, could be anybody under that mask, right?
Sure.
So, so I looked at that, and it was right after legal had put the hammer down and said, no more toys named after real people, no more designers scanning their own heads to go on Star Wars Troopers. All of that's done. And it was right after they had dropped that hammer. And I pitched it to Daryl and said, wow, we could make this a tribute to a important member of the community who died suddenly and so young. And Daryl's the one who said, I'll run it by legal. And then if legal says, okay, I'll contact the family. And because they had met, they knew who he was and he knew who Gary was. And so it was my idea, but it was Daryl who got it approved, signed off. And that was one of the coolest things was his family at Joe Fest getting a round of applause for their dad and their husband. And then we gave them like, I think, and these were the big sets, right? It was a big set.
Oh yeah.
We gave them like
the Sky Striker.
Yeah. We gave them like 30, right?
Oh.
Just so everybody in the family could have one, right? And so then they could have extra down the road for grandkids eventually. And they, I don't think it was a ton, but they did get paid for the use of his likeness on some level, even though we called the guy Gary Goggles, not Gary Head. And you can't see any inch of skin. Could be anybody. The only bummer was when they finally put him in the comic, it didn't look like Gary at all. He had a mustache. And I was I don't know if that was conscious or if they just weren't paying attention. But I was a little disappointed because that would have really been something to have the helmet come off and have it look like Gary facially. That would have been cool.
Did you see the Skeletron figure, the Geyer Wolf, or I guess that's how it's pronounced? That's another tribute to him.
Yeah, and I love everything about that project. Right?
Man, that was one of those things that you were like, this was such a smart idea.
Yeah, and there's so much good stuff being done by third party and individual companies out there. But the home run, the Michael Corleone move of any of them was them making the cockpit work for 3 3/4 or 6-inch figures.
Yes.
So there's no reason for nobody can say cool, but not for me. Actually, it is. It's for all of you.
Yes,
so I don't care if you're
for everybody.
I don't care if you're a 3 3/4 guy. I don't care if you're a classified guy. I don't care if you're an Action Force guy. I don't care if you're a Star Wars black guy and you want to make it the coolest TIE fighter you've ever seen. It works for everything. And I thought
Super 7 Ultimates fit in it.
And that's incredible, right?
Yeah.
Like, unbelievable. So
I love everything Mark about was that like project. And just stuffed him in there. Is like, there you go. Yeah, Super 7 Ultimates fit.
Probably
that was brilliant. And I understand a lot of it. I don't want to say it was born out of necessity, but it was we're going to cast a wide net and we're going to get the 1/12 and the 1/18 scale collectors. It's smart. And I've always said that even though I'm not a 1/12 scale collector for the most part, I do have some.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if Hasbro would have done that his tank with the same thing with just an interchangeable cockpit, I'd have been all over that. And I understand they don't need it.
Right.
Maybe like a Skeletron Kickstarter does, but again, that's that whole we're bringing everybody together, and I know that there's this push to turn our backs on 1/18 scale, and I'm not the biggest fan of that.
I'm not. I mean, I wish you could, and I'm saying you could feed both monsters at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, Star Wars does.
Yeah,
yeah.
I don't.
Star Wars, they have retro, they have vintage collection, which are the modern articulation, and they have Black Series, and I understand it's Star Wars versus G.I. Joe, but at one point, and you kind of mentioned it where you said some of the higher ups at Hasbro are like, it's a war line, and we all know that anytime Joe dies, it's because the higher ups at Hasbro kill it. It's not because it loses its fan base. 93 was Joe's second biggest year, and look what happened post 94. But at the same time, it's kind of one of those things like you could have Joe be what Joe was in the 90s when Joe put out Star Brigade and held off Star Wars coming back, even though, they had already bought Kenner. Joe could still be that big.
Yeah, I think it could be, and it's it's my favorite brand by far, always was. So it wasn't one of the things where I'm working on it now, so I love it. Joe was always the thing closest to my heart. I think where I think they're a little crossed right now is that classified as aimed so squarely at the adult collector that's who your 3 3/4 guys are right now, by and large, are adult collectors as well. So I don't know if they need to have two things aimed at the same guys. And I know it's harder now, harder now than ever, to capture the imagination of the youth, right? That are so drawn to screens. Hard to get them playing with toys again, but to not even try to market it towards kids on some level is a huge miss for me, because I always believed you could do both, and I thought that was part of what I did on Generations, was make toys that kids could enjoy, but that adults would want to collect as well. And it takes some work. It's a fine line to walk, but if you're not replenishing the fans coming in, this is what Major League Baseball had to deal with. The fact that their numbers were good, but their youth engagement was garbage. So if you're not replacing the ones who are aging out, even if they're just dying out, right? If you're not replacing them and you're only appeasing the diehards, I don't care how full that sink is slowly draining. So you better find a way. And if you can't do it with toy, then Hasbro has branded themselves as much an entertainment as a toy company for
where's the media?
6 years.
And that's the other thing. It's like I've heard the whole, only appeasing the adult collector market. I've heard the analogy of it's a glider, because it will fly for a little while, but it's going to crash at some point, because you're not, like you said, you're not replenishing the fan base. But Transformers can do it, He-Man can do it, Star Wars can do it, Marvel can do it, but they have media, and Joe doesn't have media. And the last couple of times Joe's tried to have media, what did we get? And that's. You had Resolute, then you had Renegades, and I know that you're a big fan of Renegades.
Absolutely. Like I think some of the stuff has been pretty credible, right? Renegades was just trapped on the hub that nobody could get.
Yeah.
So it really was kind of a team. But yeah, if I was gonna revamp Cobra, a modern Cobra would be a publicly traded company, right? It would be something that's more insidious and less in your face. There's actually a really good. It was put out before the Alien movie. I'm gonna forget the name of it, but it was one of the ones they did a couple years ago, and it had Guy Pearce as the head of the Weyland-Yutani Corporation that's always out to use the aliens for their own, nefarious purposes.
Yeah.
They did a bit Alien Covenant. Did a bit where he was giving a TED talk, right, as the CEO of this big multinational conglomerate. And at the very end of it, he smiles he's in a round, there's people all around him and thousands of people listening to him. And at the end of it, he says, I'm Jonas Weyland. Would you mind if I changed your world? Thank you very much. And the crowd went nuts. And I went, if he walked behind the curtain and put his battle helmet on, it's exactly what the modern Cobra Commander could be. And it's kind of close to what we saw in Renegades, right? That's exactly what because it'll never be a ruthless terrorist organization determined to rule the world ever again.
Right? Yeah.
No, even when they made it a terrorist organization in '82, plane hijackings were happening elsewhere, right?
Yeah.
Embassies were getting taken over there, right?
Yeah.
But that all got so much more real for us, and at 9/11, that it's never going to be that thing again, and that's okay. It doesn't mean it can't be awesome, and it can't be cool, and it can't be different.
Right.
It just has to be smart. So,
and that's a question I have for you. I'm starring other questions as they come in, because I'm going to try to hit them all at once. I'm trying to be consistent in my inconsistency. But Brandon said Joe would be that big again if only I would start collecting classified.
I mean, I don't know about your layout is impressive. I don't know if you have a second room though.
I do.
Oh, okay.
I have a game room. What 112 stuff I do have is in my game room, because I can't mix scales. I freak out. But
okay. I respect
so my question to you, since you kind of already touched on it, And, people could go back and forth about the whole terrorist organization. And I know in the Snake Eyes movie, they did a thing where they were like, yes, they're a terrorist organization, but they're like that terrorist organization behind the scene providing arms to other organizations to disrupt governments and such, which I thought was kind of cool. But at the same time, and I'm just asking your opinion because of your history, right, and your knowledge of the brand and the company and stuff, why didn't we see Joe really kind of, I don't want to say blow up, but, post 9/11, I've been in the Army for a long time, right? And I saw the public perception of soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines, service members change post 9/11, like to the point where it became almost unbearably uncomfortable, where we would walk anywhere and people just applaud and they love you so much, and you don't want to leave the house sometimes.
Right.
But why didn't we see a change in the perception or the marketing or anything with G.I. Joe around that time?
Yeah, it's interesting because I was collecting, obviously, but I wasn't. I was at McFarlane at the time, and I wonder if it was the more real they made it, or to try to tie it to legit current military, when there was that upswing in respect and honor for servicemen. And I was glad to see it, right? Obviously.
Right.
But yeah, you make a good point to how it might have gotten a little overbearing, at times. But it also was because it was based on such a horrific incident. And we didn't, I mean, remember, we feel safer now, right? Because nothing catastrophic has happened since, in the 20 some years since.
Yeah.
But we didn't know, right? We had no idea if that was step one of an overall master plan. And so I think people were just a little, I'm going to guess that Hasbro was a little nervous about tying too closely to legit military, because it could have got dark real fast, and there would have been no way to pivot as a company with stuff planned 2 years out. So I'm guessing that was some of the reticence about not wanting to get too close to it. And again, there are the people who are just, we don't want it to be a war brand.
I can see that. Yeah.
That stuff has gone all the way back to the early 70s, right? That undercurrent that took over Joe for a while. And it might have been the right call to go to Adventure Team. If they hadn't, maybe there never would have been a real American hero. Hard to say.
I wouldn't have got a 4-inch version of Bullet Man.
There you go. So I don't know for sure, but that's my guess.
And I can understand that does make sense, because like you pointed out, if it's a 2-year process to get it from, development to on the pegs, and you're monopolizing on something, and maybe something unfortunate or catastrophic does happen, that doesn't make sense. But it's something that I've often considered, like, why didn't we have that resurgence? Because after the first Gulf War, right, you saw that 12-inch Duke come out, right, and then you saw the later version of the 3 3/4-inch Duke, even though he's riding a rocket, but still, right, you could see where Joe was starting to change to that desert camouflage and things like that.
And I was always, as a collector, I always preferred the Joes who looked more legit military, right? Sure. Like I like when Hit and Run would show up, right? Or one of the real heartbreakers for me, Recoil, who I love.
Oh yeah.
But he's wearing that Devo helmet with the nuclear blue weaponry, and I'm like, you're so close here.
Yeah.
Like, I could forgive the helmet if he had legit looking gray or black weapons, but we're gonna go nuclear with some
blue. Of the 90s stuff. Yeah. I love a lot of the 90s stuff. There's some really good gems in there. Some of them you're like, like just like this, like Ice Cream Soldier, you're calling a flamethrower Ice Cream Soldier.
Yeah.
And then you've got really cool figures, but they have like day glow yellow everything. But at the same time, we got the Ghost Striker and Ace version 3, which is probably one of the best figures ever. General Flag. You finally start seeing some October Guard. I mean, God forbid we get October Guard figures before the 90s, which was a weird decision. But
it took them so long to kind of dive into October Guard that we went from we can't make them because it's a Cold War into now we can't make them because
there's no more Cold War.
Well, and then now Russia's invaded another country. Probably not the right timing for the October Guard. So
Again, right? See, back to that
wait.
9/11 thing, right?
Yeah, they got to hit their spot. Yeah, and the 9/11 thing, like, you know, like I said, we didn't know at the time that maybe we didn't know if they were better financed, or if it was part of a bigger organization, or if a country was actually funding them, right? So it was I mean, I don't have to tell you, but a really scary time in American history. And
it was nuts. Yeah. 100%.
And I don't think the military, or especially the intelligence community, gets enough credit, because whatever threats there may have been since pretty much have gotten found out and snuffed out and never make the paper.
Yeah.
So don't just think that people stop trying. Give some credit to the folks out there who are working hard to keep us safe.
Yeah, I've been churning that war on terror life for decades, and yeah, I've been privy to a couple of things where I was like, nobody even knows this happened.
Right? Yeah, exactly.
It's crazy.
One of the bits, it was funny, when I was first at Hasbro, they had an idea fair where you could pitch an idea for any line. It didn't have to be what you were working on. I was working on Transformers. And so I pitched an idea for a Joe cartoon, for some animation that would also look at, the intro would be a Joe in peril or a Joe on a mission, but it would flash back to them as kids. And so you would have, Scarlet escaping the base with the secret plans, and she'd come to a tightrope, right? That was her only way out. And you'd flash back to her with a balance beam as a kid. And so the idea of what made them special as kids makes them elite now. And so the whole show wouldn't have been like that, but it's like the teaser on the front of a Bond movie. And so that kind of thing, I thought would have helped have kids identify, oh, she's like me. But the real hook was to make Destro the main villain, at least for the first year or two, because real carefully you could have Destro fueling dissent in countries around the world, and fueling both sides, so you aren't making a group evil or a group good, just both manipulated. And in that way, when the Joe team, the core 5 or 6, would go out there, they would go to Finland and meet Snow Job, because it's a snow mission, right? Or they would go to London and meet Big Ben, who's an embedded Joe. And so you're introducing the guys that make sense via specialty, or introducing new Joes, right? As like, the wolf spider, Partharma, who almost everyone believes is Indian, right? We don't really have a Joe from India. Great way to introduce him, a mission in India. And what I thought was clever trick of that is, by making Joe trying to fight Destro, the arms dealer, you're actually making them anti-war. Right. They're trying to stop conflict. Yeah.
It's all about converting. Right.
Yeah, and you're globetrotting them at the same time, which I think it would have been sensational, and it didn't go anywhere. And I remember at the end, one of the higher ups there pulled me aside and said, because I think he could tell I was disappointed, and he said, "Your idea is great, your presentation was outstanding, but they're not going to finance Joe animation right now." I'm like, okay, well, maybe someday.
A couple of points on what you just said. One, that's a brilliant way of reeling the kids in, because you're showing them like you could do this too, because you're experiencing these things as a child. That's brilliant. Two, that's always been my argument about G.I. Joe in live action. Exactly what you described, but do it something like that TV show, The Unit, where you only have a core group that goes anywhere, maybe like Hawk generally stays in the talk at the pit or something, but you have a couple Joes and they go somewhere, and depending on the terrain and the mission, you would encounter, say, Snow Job or Recondo or Bazooka or this guy or that guy or Big Ben, or God forbid, like Quarrel, someone like that from like Action Force. And I always thought that's how you bring Joe back. You don't make it too violent or to the point where you're alienating some of your audience, or the people who are the decision makers, like you just said. But at the same time, like The Unit, it didn't cost a lot per episode or per season to make that show, and it went for 5 seasons. So that show was enjoyed by a lot of people. And just the way you described the animation, I'm like, why couldn't you do a TV show like this?
Yeah, and it's funny because if you equate it to Mask on some level, because Mask was Kenner's idea of, God, Joe and Transformers are killing us. What if we made our own Joe and Transformers forced together. But I always thought that was one of the most brilliant concepts, was when they would come together and go, oh, Venom's causing trouble over in Iowa or whatever. Who are the best agents for this job? And they would go to the computer and it would cycle through them, and you're rooting for your guy, right? Yep. Like if I was a kid, I'd be like, yeah, where's, like, if you equated to Joe, I'd be like, come on, Steeler, right? Come on, Thunder, like the guys I liked. And you wouldn't get them. Most of the times you wouldn't get them. But when you did, it was a big win. And every time you were excited for the opportunity that roulette wheel was going to stop. And if you were a diehard short fuse fan, right, at some point they're in a mountaintop, headquarters that they're going to have to bloop rounds into to secure entrance, right? And I loved that bit on that. Mask was not a great cartoon. I don't know how many times I could see Scott and T-Bob save the day, but I love that bit of who am I going to get this week. I
just like the fact that you said bloop rounds.
Well, bloop. Yeah. Hardball could help too, maybe, but
yeah. And then Matt Rubin, was I the only Brad Turner fan? No, I have a 4-inch custom Brad Turner. I love Brad Turner, man. He's awesome.
From what we've heard, that price point, and it was true for Joe too, the Serpentor or Zartan price point, right, was a huge seller because it was about the limit of what a parent would spend on a birthday present for somebody else's kid, right? You couldn't just get him a $3 figure. That's not, it seems a little cheap. But you weren't going to go $10. You weren't going to get him a Vamp, right? But that $5.99 price point, perfect for a birthday party. And I think I heard somewhere, and that's about as big a endorsement as I can give for it, that the Condor, the Brad Turner, was the best-selling Mask figure by far.
Yes, the Condor. The Condor. It's such an easy vehicle to transform. Flip it up. There's the thing. There goes the wheel. Yeah, it's an awesome little vehicle. You didn't have the stuff with the Condor like you did with the Thunderhawk, where you like push on stuff and maybe the spring doesn't work, or the Rhino. And the Condor is a fantastic little vehicle. And then you had like Slyrax, and you had the Piranha, and it was kind of the opposite of the Gator. And they did such a good job with Mask, where they had this vehicle can go against this vehicle, and if you get this one, you definitely want that one too. I love Mask.
Yeah, they kind of set them up. They had, kind of like pro wrestling rivalries, right? Like these guys hate each other because they should. It was, or from Transformers perspective, Blaster and Soundwave should be mortal enemies, right? Because they do the same thing for opposite sides.
Yeah, exactly.
Totally good. And
then there you go. Interrogator could make an appearance in the Chuckles episode of an animated series. Bam.
He's the best. And it was one of the, anytime I can pub up Max Brooks's Hearts and Minds G.I. Joe, you can get it at a trade paperback.
Oh, yeah.
He did an Interrogator issue, which was one of my 5 favorite ever, just because I love it. Not just because I love Interrogator, but so good. And then that was the last thing I got to do on the Joe brand. Was the week that they eliminated my position, I owed Brian Savage file card for, actually the last thing I did was Ghost Rider. For the fan club Ghost Rider. I got to write
Ghost Rider scratched out.
That was my idea. Yeah. So I finished that after I left. I reached out to him and said, I'd still like to do it. Can I send it to you? And he said, 100% web. But he had reached out to me earlier on when they made Interrogator. And they said, I know you're an Interrogator fan #1. Would you like to write his file card? And I'm like, are you kidding me? Like,
no,
the best thing ever. I only got to do that a couple times because even within Hasbro, they had a writing division that did that stuff. And I didn't want to step on any toes. And by and large, they did a really good job. But writing file cards, come on. And I got to write it for Interrogator. And if you look it up, the quotes they have down at the bottom, I lifted one straight from Hearts and Minds, where he was like, look, if I need to blow up a safe to get to what's inside, I'll do it. But really, all you got to know is the right pressure points, something like that, right? Yeah. And it was so good that I'm not going to write anything better than that. Come here.
Yeah, just borrow it, right?
It is. I mean, it was already licensed, so paid for on some level. So
it's all Joe.
And I thought it's so good. How could I how can I even think I could come up with something better? So I got to drop that in. So that's a favorite memory of mine, is getting to write the file card for my favorite, for a new version, a modern version of my favorite Cobra, who is a guy who's hardly anybody's favorite. I think most people like him, but he didn't have a huge impact in any of the entertainment. And he came along a little later in the brand when it wasn't quite as hot. But dude, he's Cobra Fett, basically. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Was he figure subscription service, or was he Joe-Con?
Yeah.
I can't remember.
No, he was FSS. I think he was in Joe-Con in one of the retro O-ring packs with a removable
But
helmet,
I mean the modern one,
which was kind of. But the modern one was FSS. Yeah.
Yeah, because I don't want to be like, well, actually, let me pull out my guide and look. Thank you.
I don't get everything. I don't get everything right.
I've got him. Trust me, I've got him. I love that figure. Again, he's on that Cobra leadership shelf. Yeah. So he's up there with Tombstone and all those guys.
I like the idea that everybody dislikes him on some level because he's helmeted at all times.
Yeah.
So when he comes to work, you have no idea who he actually is.
No,
he might be the guy next to you at lunch.
Yeah.
Being like, this sucks. They just changed my shift. What do you think? And then remembers everything you're saying, right? Like nobody likes Interrogator.
But speaking of liking, my buddy Keith from JP Jotographs, who's one of the best G.I. Joe toy photographers in the world, says Condor rules and evening gentlemen. So very cool.
There you go.
So we talked about animation. We kind of talked about toys. Here's a question that kind of brings the two together because, again, as I was researching for tonight's show of us hanging out chatting, I saw something that I never knew, and I love learning new stuff about my number one passion. It's awesome, right? I'm a huge fan of that whole lifelong learning idea. In an interview, you mentioned that you saw a mock-up of a Resolute style USS Flag toy.
I don't remember. I remember saying that because I don't remember seeing that.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, well, we'll just edit that out.
Yeah, well, I think the further back you go, the more hazy it gets. But
that's okay.
As far as I know, never any plans for anything that big.
Well, for everyone in the chat, there was a mock-up of a Resolute style USS Flag with the two launch tracks on the front for 3 3/4, which I thought was crazy, and I just read that.
Yeah.
In the same interview, and I'm going to ask this question. If you don't remember, just say pass.
Yeah.
You stated, I think Joe fans would welcome a 6-inch line. So this is how long ago this interview was.
Yeah.
As long as it comes simultaneously with traditional 3 3/4 or 4-inch scale offerings. Do you still believe that?
Yeah. And it was, Bobby Val and I pitched
the 6-inch. Yep. For
together.
Comic-Con, right?
No, it would have been, the idea was that it would have launched with, at the time, it was G.I. Joe 3. It was a continuation of, it was post-retaliation.
Yeah.
And the idea was that they wanted to have 6-inch figures to go with the movie line. And you're always fighting for the shelf space, right, at retailers.
Yep.
And the further back you go, the more important brick and mortar was. And so now we're talking 5-6 years ago. And we had put together a really dynamite pitch. And the idea was that we would have movie, I called it, what was it called? G.I. Joe Elite is what it was called for the 6-inch line. And that we would have it for the movie. And then when the movie faded out, we would replace it with classic characters. It would still stay G.I. Joe Elite, but it would be, classic Duke or even reimagined Duke, right? But the idea was you wouldn't be paying a royalty to Paramount on it anymore, so they would immediately become more profitable. So same shelf configuration, same size of box, same scale of figure, but it would become instantly more profitable. So you could either keep it more profitable, or our pitch was you would have build a vehicle with it. Now we're talking tiny vehicles, right? But if Wave 1 let you build, one guy came with a jump pack, and the rest came with the other 4 came with a portion of the jump pad for him to go on. Cool. You're not hurting anybody, right?
Right.
And if you didn't want to build it, don't. But Build a Figure obviously works. Otherwise, lines wouldn't be doing it. Transformers is adopting it. And it's been a staple of the Marvel line for 20 years. So, but there are enough cool small vehicles that you could split up between 4 or 5 figures, a ram or a claw, or even as a gag, like a low crawl vehicle or a road toad, right?
LCV recon sled, yeah.
Right. You're never buying the low crawl vehicle, right? Never. No. But are you mad at it if you get it for free with all of Wave 2? Not the same way. So there's a lot of stuff, pack rats, right? You could have done any number of them over the years. And so that was our pitch. And when we pitched it, when we said, because we were pitching to a room of higher ups, when I said, and then when the movie fades out, we can transition to classic characters. And we were still talking, and the biggest name in the room started shaking her head. Nope. Didn't even let us complete our pitch that we'd been working on for more than a month, right? And once the chef in the kitchen is given the no sign, nobody's going to question that, right?
Right.
So it was dead on arrival, was not believed to be a direction they wanted to go in. And then lo and behold, 2 years later, it's pretty much all they're doing for G.I. Joe. So I don't know what changed. That person, the head shaker isn't there anymore. And good riddance. But
however,
but something changed. So I'm for the people who don't like classified, and I know you're on that in that area. I'm happy.
I'm on that witch hunt.
Yeah, well, that's fine. I'm not telling people I never say people have to like anything, but there were so many recent years when there was either nothing or not much hope for the brand. So anything that keeps the brand viable is good overall, right? Nothing lasts forever. But
True.
if 6-inch and classified can keep the brand top of mind on some level and be quite it's so much more profitable than the Marvel or the Star Wars stuff because there's no royalty attached to it. So it's great. I have no idea what the overall sales numbers are, right? But if they make $3 off every black figure sold, they make $6 off Joe.
Right.
So it has value.
Right. Yeah. The brand definitely has value. Speaking of which, what are your feelings on Haya Toys kind of drawing in the 4-inch modern articulation market?
I have one coming. I don't have one yet in hand, so I really want to feel it, get it, and how's it hold up. I'm stunned that they licensed out figures anywhere, because when I was on the brand, that was a don't even ask. Right?
Yeah.
Nobody makes Joe figures except us. And what they did with Super 7, I understand at least the reaction figures, right?
Because it's for reaction people, and it gets them. It gets Joe in their line of sight.
Yeah, on some level, it's like letting Funko make pops, right?
Yeah,
same characters, but totally different thing. Joe was shouldn't have ever been 5 points of articulation.
Right.
Yeah. When they went there, the backlash was sudden and severe, and rightly so.
Sure. And again, that's just it's reaction. It's their style. It's their aesthetic.
And the fact that they gave them kind of the Sunbow sandbox to play in, then and I think Super 7's done a great job of mining that content.
Sure.
To give us stuff that either has or hasn't in a long time or never did.
They're doing some deep cuts.
Yeah. But I would never, if it were me, I don't want another company building a better mousetrap. I don't want somebody making a better 4-inch Snake Eyes than I have. Or if it isn't better, if it isn't the best ever, it's certainly the best right now because there's nothing else out there official. So
that's it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I am stunned by that.
I was too.
But I'm not mad about it. I don't get mad about almost anything because I think anytime the brand, they try something with the brand, it's either good for the brand or they'll learn from it, right? Like
Yeah.
seeing $8 pullback vamps at Walgreens. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, like this stuff.
Yeah,
The little
yeah,
die cast. Yeah,
yeah,
they're
and the
great.
Jada stuff. I don't collect all of it. I don't need all of it. It doesn't have to be for me, right? But if it is for somebody else or for a lot of other people, cool. I'm not mad at it, especially if it's licensed out. It's not an item count being taken away from what you wanted Hasbro to make, right?
Right.
Them Haya Toys making a Snake Eyes 4-inch figure doesn't mean your desperately wanted classified muskrat
Tiger
didn't get
Force
made this
somebody.
year. Yeah, it doesn't work like that. It's not a zero-sum game.
Right.
So I don't have any problem with any of it, even if it doesn't speak to me, even if I think it's kind of dumb. I like the I'll say it wrong, the Bishoju figures, right? The anime style girls all looking a little sexier than they probably should.
Right.
I don't need any of that.
Scarlet Baroness. Woo!
I would feel a little weird having that on my shelf, but there are people who dig that stuff, and it's not getting made in. That's not why we aren't getting a classified hydrofoil, right?
Sure.
Like, or to be more realistic, it's not why they didn't make classified Zap yet, right? Oh, look at this. It doesn't work like that. So for the people who get all worked up about, I don't want that, that's not for me. No, it shouldn't be all for you. Spread it out. Like pops don't do anything for me, right? But I'm not mad at them, right? I don't want them to go away.
Yeah, it's just parallel stuff that doesn't apply to or affect me whatsoever.
Yeah, but but if it sells and sells well, it's good for the brand, and that helps the stuff you like continue to get made.
Yeah.
So I don't say I'm ambivalent, and I don't cheer everything just because I like G.I. Joe, right? But like I'll go nitpicking nuts on like the Cobra Officer Trooper 2-pack that the 3-quarter guys that they put out where they had their weapons in the wrong hand.
Yes.
That's not hard. Like, come on. Like, I don't know He-Man at all, but I guarantee you, if I all of a sudden was making decisions on the brand, I would figure out whose weapon belongs to who, right? I'm not giving Merman's crossbow to Moss Man, right?
Merman's corn sword.
Yeah. I don't even know what I'm talking about. But
I get you.
But I would if it was my responsibility. So I'm hard on some of that stuff. Yeah. But for what gets made and what doesn't, and I don't like it, and that's not for me, God, you should root for all of it. Yeah. Because it's anything that helps the brand helps you.
I'm kind of the same. When they came out with the Walmart retro collection that are 50th anniversary, and they've got Snake Eyes version 2 on the card that has Snake Eyes version 1, and then you've got the long sleeve Storm Shadow 50th anniversary on the card with the short sleeve, and you're like, why are you doing that? Like, stop doing that. Who made that decision? But I will say,
the brutal part, Joe's, and like five people saw that at least, and nobody caught that. Like, come on.
Yeah. Or the HasLab Sky Striker, where you open the box and it says open form side instead of open from side. And I'm sure that was probably
I have done stuff like that in my career, right? Like I had a McFarlane figure come out for I think it was Franco Harris from the Pittsburgh Steelers. Like, oh, come on, right? No! We did a commemorative Gretzky for when he became the all-time leading goal scorer, and they got the date wrong on the base. December 12th, 1994 or 2012. No. No, it was November 12th. No way to get that one back. The one of the first ones I got to work on, the Crimson Rattler for San Diego Comic-Con.
Yes.
That was Power Glide too, right?
Yeah.
It was an Autobot crossover. When we got the first sample from the factory, it was way too pink. Not crimson enough, way too pink.
Right.
And like the second I got it, I went to Daryl. I'm like, yo, this is wrong. He's like, it's 100% wrong. I said, I'll take a picture. I'll get in touch with the factory right now. They'll see it overnight. We'll have an answer tomorrow. So I sent, detailed photos and comparisons and And the next morning they got right back to us and said, yeah, we understand it's wrong, but we already ran all of them and reset the whole line. So it is what it is. And I'm like, so the first time we see it, it's already too late to fix anything that's wrong, right? The 4-inch Gung Ho, which is a great figure and the fans really dug. If you look at him really close, dude, that nobody's mad because I got the ball and anchor on there, right? But it's like halfway up his Adam's apple. Yep. It's way too high up. Yeah. And the rest of the figure is friggin' perfect. But we get the first sample in and I tell the factory, yo, you got to drop that a good 1/4 inch down his chest. And they're like, yeah, we already made them all. Like, right there. Yeah. So I'm not Teflon. There were things that I missed, and there were things. Sometimes there are things that the factory did wrong that they can't fix, and those are some real. And those make you feel old pretty quick. But some of the basic stuff, like get the sniper rifle in the trooper's hand and the AK-47 in the officer's hand, get the chevron on the officer helmet. Yeah, that's just lazy, and that stuff drives me nuts.
All right, I got some starred questions for you here.
All right,
here we go. Oh, and then Josiah says it's hard to do new figures when there's no media support. I mean, they're doing what they can, but yeah,
I suppose that's true. But Transformers has new characters that never appeared in anything that they're doing right now. Right? They made a whole bunch of new Junkions that have never been in anything. They made skeletal Dinobots, which I thought they were a little wonky, but they were brand new, all new characters that had no media support. So I would counter argue that.
Fair enough. That's what I like about you guys. Like, I mean, obviously there was a thing yesterday, and I made a big post about it today. So whatever, it's behind everybody is whatever. It was a misstep on my part and a misunderstanding with other people, but you guys are, especially you and Mike, you're very skilled at. Yes, I understand what you're saying. However, let me.
Right, I appreciate that, and part of that was like I was the main voice on the McFarlane message boards for a decade, right? And find me another company that has message boards on their own homepage, right? Even if McFarlane even eventually tapped out on it, but there is a skill to hearing the argument, and you can sometimes I'll actually say it. You can have a disagreement without having an argument. Right, you have to try to make it an argument.
Yes, exactly.
So, like,
that's kind of along the lines of being offended, right? It's like, well, I'm offended. Well, that's a choice. Like, you chose to get offended.
Absolutely.
I just said what I said. Like,
I'm far more of a classified fan than you are. We disagree about the line. That doesn't mean we're going to argue or fight about it. It actually means we could probably do 2 hours about it and recognize each other's points. And understand where the other one's coming from without agreeing with them. It's my two biggest things with it, and I'm going to get to the questions for you. It's real straightforward. One, I'm not going to restart a collection. Mm-hmm. I mean that's simple. That's really simple. I don't have the space. I'm not getting rid of all this. Most of this shit has your signature on it anyway, right? I'm not getting rid of any of this stuff. I don't have the space to restart, and I have no interest in upscaled versions of what I've already got. And that's just a personal opinion. That's all there is to it. And I don't disagree with any of those stances, right? And I do think, and that was one of the things I rang the bell at hard at McFarlane when they wanted to change scale.
Yeah.
Was nothing will make a collector abandon, not just buy less, but abandon collecting something than changing scale. Imagine if you made baseball cards slightly bigger, right? Nobody does that, right? Even slightly smaller. Nobody does that because a baseball card or a football card should be this size, right? Nobody collects oversized stamps. If you're a stamp collector, you know what size a stamp is supposed to be. So going 6 inches, even though there was a history of success for Star Wars and Marvel, yeah, they had to understand, and I think I'm going to guess they did.
Yeah,
that
it's 4 decades plus of
yeah, and that however big they believe their collector base was, they had to expect to lose at least 15 or 20%.
yeah,
To just
and
be like, not I'll cherry pick, I'll buy a couple or I won't buy them all, but just nope, does nothing
yep,
for me.
nope. And that's the thing. It's like you are losing that part of the collector base, but it's not necessarily that collector saying I'm turning my back on you. It's that you don't even offer me a product to still purchase, and
Right.
that's okay because again, there's like Grindhouse Toys and Marauders, and I love the Eagle Force stuff from Fresh Monkey Fiction, and that's okay. I've still got that, so I don't fault them for it, but at the same time, it's just kind of it is what it is. It's
Yeah,
just
you aren't.
it's
It
there.
isn't like you have a lifetime subscription, right? You don't have
Yeah,
to support something you don't like. And I walked away from Joe twice in my life, right? When
yeah,
I had no passion for Sergeant Savage, and I was already aging out at that point. And they didn't have nor like what we did really well on Transformers. We tried to build a staircase so nobody ever had to leave the brand. So when you wouldn't be caught dead with an Optimus Prime toy in your locker as a 7th grader, right? Nobody wants to be embarrassed in 7th grade with a kid toy in their locker. But you know what? You can play it on your app. You can play an
yeah,
app game of it. That doesn't make you a geek. Might make you cool. I don't know. But when you would traditionally lose kids away from toys is where you keep them with entertainment and electronics. That's where the kids are now anyway. And
yeah.
maybe that's skewed a lot younger in the last, 5-6 years. But
And Joe had a couple of mobile games that were doing well for a while, and then for whatever reason, they got turned off. I'm sure some of that was repeat players and whatever metrics that people look at. But they did have a couple mobile apps going. They did have the Operation Blackout game, and like it, don't like it, whatever. I mean, they still put a game out.
yeah,
I still bought it.
that was one of the things I wanted to do with my proposed entertainment was to have some of the characters being considered for further out, have them as playable characters in an app game like Assault on Cobra Mountain or whatever. And
Yeah,
then some people can do stuff other people can't do. Alpine can get up the mountain faster, right?
sure.
But rock and roll has more firepower. Stuff that
Yep.
makes sense. But see who people are picking to play as, right? That was something at McFarlane. They made Guitar Hero toys for a while. And the thing that they missed was because they had from the online stuff, Guitar Hero, the company that made them, knew which characters were selected most often, right?
Right.
They knew who their stars were. But the guy that was selected like 55% of the time was the default guy, meaning that people weren't picking at all. They were just hitting enter to say,
Yeah.
let me play my damn guitar. So, yeah, maybe that's not what you want to make character figures of if most of the people playing don't care who
Right.
they are. All they want to do is strum their guitar. So, same way I thought you could really dig into almost crowdsourcing the information of who's really resonating with kids on our app. That's
Yeah.
who's going to, I'm not 100%, but if you're looking at the last figure in lineup 2 years away, if Alpine is 5 times as popular as Mutt, maybe you should make Alpine. Who knows?
Agreed. Plus, Alpine's awesome, and
Yeah.
and if you're gonna lean on all the nostalgia and you make Bazooka, where's Alpine?
Yeah. I mean, they're the tag team champs, right? You need both.
Right. They're
You
Batman and Robin, pretty much.
Can't have Hawk without Animal.
Exactly. I'm gonna get to our questions. I'm gonna get back to them. Here's a question for you. If you don't want to touch it, that's fine. Just say pass. I totally appreciate and respect that. Were you in the room at all, ever, whenever, during this whole Let's Can G.I. Joe 3?
I mean, one time I got to sit in, and I think it was because Daryl was gone or out of town. So I got to be in a meeting that normally I wouldn't have been. So it was with Daryl's boss and me on a video call with, I think, the prospective writer for G.I. Joe 3, who is not the guy who ended up writing Snake Eyes. This is when we were looking at the continuation of the story from Retaliation. and they were going through their initial pitch, and it was the marching Cobra troops passing by Cobra Commander out on the balcony, watching his assembled might walk in front of him, and they were gonna have him get literally knifed in the back, like 2 minutes into the movie. Cobra Commander done. And whether or not you like Rise of Cobra or Retaliation, I think everybody will agree that they really didn't maximize the Cobra Commander character at all. They really minimized him, especially in the first one, where it takes forever.
Was getting there.
Yeah, and I think you could have built off that, made up for lost time anyway. I would have, if I had some pull, which I didn't. I would have made Cobra Commander really important in that third movie. And so they're running this thing, and they're like, and the guy who's Daryl's boss doesn't know Joe as well as Daryl, certainly, and not even as well as I do. And so they go, and Cobra Commander gets knifed in the back, and he's dead. And I think I made a face. I was sitting across the table from Daryl's boss, and he did the canine kind of head cock, like, what is that? And so we're on a video call. They can see us. And I say to him, real careful and real quiet, I think it's a mistake to kill the top villain in the first 2 minutes.
Yeah, because in the last one, you kind of murdered Duke. And I know that was Channing Tatum's whole, I don't want to be in this movie anymore, but you're going to do it again?
Yeah. I think if you're going to move him off the chessboard, it needs to be a big moment, not in the first 2 minutes. And I said, I think it's a mistake to kill the top villain. But I said it real quiet, and I wasn't moving my mouth very much because I didn't. And one of the writer guys was like, "What's that over there?" And I'm like, "Oh,
what do you say?"
Jesus. And I look up, and they're just waiting, right? And now I'm looking over at the boss, and I'm like, "Fine." And I just voiced that. I said, I think it's a mistake to kill the top villain that quickly. And it didn't. In the end, the movie didn't go anywhere. But the initial pitch was, let's kill Cobra Commander right away so we can tell the story we want to tell. And that was the only time I was ever in a room where it was being discussed. But for a long time, G.I. Joe 3 was supposed to be G.I. Joe 3.
Right.
I was
or whatever they were going to call it. Yeah.
I was long gone before it pivoted to becoming, Snake Eyes.
Right.
Snake Eyes 1 or Snake Eyes 0, depending on how you want to look at
it. And that's another one of those decisions that any of us in the not just the G.I. Joe YouTube space, but just G.I. Joe fandom, like you can walk up to any G.I. Joe fan and be like, hey, so let's talk about that Snake Eyes movie. And then, it just kind of unloads. But as soon as they started talking about a Snake Eyes origin movie, I'm like, hey, did you not witness what happened with the Wolverine Origins movie? So you take the most popular X-Men, played by an actor that everyone says like is a perfect fit, and you try to make an Origins movie based off that popularity, and you see what it got you. Mm-hmm. And then you try to make an Origins movie out of a character who doesn't speak, and then you change him radically so he does speak, so you can make an Origins movie out of him when he's really just a part of a team. And I don't see how someone, I guess I can now, because like you said, writers are like, what are you talking about? Brr.
Yeah.
I don't see how someone didn't go, is this a bad idea?
Right. Yeah. And it's funny because so much of the furor about the Snake Eyes movie was about the fact that he speaks and that they changed the ethnicity of the basic character. But in the end, it still could have been a good movie with either or both of those things.
Yes.
The mortal sin was that they changed his character. And that they made him
a jerk, and he was pretty much the bad guy
and manipulative. Yeah. And in a movie where they nailed Storm Shadow,
yes,
and where Scarlet and the Baroness were both pretty damn good in what time they got, that they missed the idea that the silent ninja, the faceless character, was always the moral core of the G.I. Joe team.
Yeah. because he's broken and he's vulnerable, but he's reliable and he's like massively talented at the same time. But he stays on the team for his teammates, even though he's that destroyed.
Yeah.
But he's still that reliable. Like the guy, like you talked about courage.
Yeah,
He is the embodiment of that. And yeah, I mean, we could talk about that all night long, but it's just kind of one of those things there. I wish I had been a fly on the wall in some of these conversations, like, you know, building the framework of the Snake Eyes movie, the whole thing with Lorenzo di Bonaventura and the Hood and all that drama and all of the stuff, or even these conversations with di Bonaventura and whoever else about, well, let's just slap this Joe scene in the end of Transformers: Rise of the Beast. Did you see that?
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
I mean, it's okay, fine. I think it makes sense to try to cross those guys over, especially
because you're hitching it to Transformers success. I get it.
And the further Transformers gets away from Bay, the better, I think. And everybody knows who owns Mask now, right? So if you want to have G.I. Joe meets Transformers, that is Mask, right? So maybe that's another easy spin-off. It's basically agents with Cybertronian tech applied to their vehicles. Sure. Love to see it. So I think there's options. And that's really what Hasbro wanted to do, was unite their boys brands under one.
Yeah, that whole
universe.
So
and
the Hasbro universe and the Unit E stuff that they're doing with Mask.
And they did it with IDW, and I was there for most of that, right? And it kind of worked, as much as you can sew, ROM to Stretch Armstrong.
Yeah.
But
Mask is an easy way. Like you can hitch Mask to G.I. Joe and hitch the two of them to Transformers so easily.
Yeah.
Because Mask could just be like another clandestine part of G.I. Joe somewhere. Just like Z Force or Q Force or SAS in Europe could be part of it as well.
Absolutely.
The way that they turned Baron Ironblood into Cobra Commander. Done.
Yep.
Easy.
Absolutely. You absolutely could do any of that. So
my only thing with that movie is I watched it. I only watched it for the Joe scene at the end, right? That's the only reason why I watched it.
Yeah.
And when I watched that scene, I'm like, okay, so you got Michael Kelly and it's totally different. But his card still has the current or modern version of the Joe symbol with the hawk or the eagle.
Yeah.
And I'm like, so are we tying this to the Retaliation Joe? Are we tying this to the Snake Eyes Joe?
Yeah.
Or are we just doing a -3? Are we wiping it out?
I have no inside baseball on that, but
Yeah.
I would bet the plan was that it was going to tie to the Snake Eyes movie, except that they don't want, I would bet, they don't want anything tied to the Snake Eyes movie.
No, right? Because it bombed.
Because it was rotten. So, well, here's the thing. It's easy just to go, God, that movie sucked, right? But people do that about episode 1, Phantom Menace, right? Oh my God, Jar Jar, so stupid. I hated that. That whole movie was garbage. You're like, you didn't like Darth Maul? Really?
The whole movie was not garbage.
That's it. You didn't like the best saber fight ever on screen? Like, so I'm careful. I try to be careful when I talk about the Snake Eyes movie, because there are 8 billion sword fights with not one drop of blood.
Yeah.
And Snake Eyes was a manipulative asshole. But Storm Shadow was amazing, right? Scarlet and the Baroness are pretty damn credible. So
I really liked Samara Weaving as Scarlet. I didn't appreciate the fact that you could see which scenes were reshoots, because they just kind of come out of nowhere, like, oh, hey, I'm going to use my mouse, right? Like, let me pick up the phone and I'm going to call Scarlet. Oh, I'm in this bathroom. Hang on a second. And then she gets back on the phone. I'm like, this has no bearing on the story at all. But I liked Samara Weaving as Scarlet. I liked the original actress from Rise of Cobra as Scarlet. I just think that, martial arts movie, okay. G.I. Joe movie, because you got Snake Eyes wrong, just like you said. I'm not saying that the entire movie was bad. Some of those shots they're gorgeous looking. Like the stuff in the city in the rain with the neon, it looks beautiful. But
imagine if they had done Avengers and made Captain America kind of a jerk. Right?
Yeah.
Or made Iron Man, because he's a tech guy, made him a nerd. right?
Right.
Where he was awkward and funky, right? I mean, it kind of fits how somebody might interpret that character if they don't know what the hell they have.
Yeah.
Right. But it's especially those two nailing Iron Man and nailing Captain America made all the rest of it work.
And getting RDJ to be Tony Stark, because he's like the real life Tony Stark.
He is.
I mean, look at his life was a mess. He turned it around. He's freaking Tony Stark.
Yeah.
He is. Just
and
like Ray Park is Darth Maul, Ray Park was Snake Eyes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's totally fine. And again, I didn't get too as upset as a lot of people did about him not, having a face and having a voice. And
no, because he always did at some point. He always did.
Yeah, and it tells a better story long term.
Yes.
If you could remember what he was like before whatever happens.
Yeah.
But
it's like reading issue 26 and you're like, man, now I get it. I have a better understanding of Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow and their relationship and Stalker, and it's blowing my mind. Sure, I get it. And I have to bring this conversation all the way back around full circle because I like doing that at times. This goes along with everything you and I have been talking about, where you don't want the people who are like the diehard know-it-alls, and you also don't want the people who know nothing. You know, it's that balancing act. It's like the example I always use is Star Trek 2. Right, the guy, it's escaping me right now, but the guy who wrote Star Trek 2, obviously Wrath of Khan is arguably the best Star Trek movie. He knew just enough to color inside the lines, and everything else he just went hog wild with it, and he made such a brilliant movie. And I think you need those people where they understand their left and right limits, and it's the same with G.I. Joe Resolute. Right. The guys who wrote Resolute, they only knew so much about G.I. Joe, and look at how brilliant that was. Yeah,
absolutely. But it was a guy who was known for writing Punisher and Daredevil stuff. And so, gritty action was exactly what he's good at.
And that's what you got. That's what made it blood.
And it made it stand out versus all other Joe stuff. Like, wow, this is a little bit dark. And
and that Resolute Commander's no joke,
Yeah.
Bazooka, I thought it was kind of funny. It was a little tongue-in-cheek sort of wink, like, Bazooka's not everybody's favorite Joe. We're gonna kill him.
I mean, they kind of did him dirty in IDW Comics when they expanded the Joe team, and he was, 280, right?
Yeah.
And he was like, I don't know, is there any kind of fitness test required? Like, Bazooka is one of those guys who might have let himself go. I could see that.
Yeah, totally. So Demguts asks, did Tombstone have hair in the original design?
I didn't prescribe physically what he had to look like, because you got to be really careful as a marketer not to play designer too much, because that's their job. So what the bit he was given was, he should be handsome and he should be proud of how he looks. He knows he's a good looking guy. That's it. That's all I gave him. So, but the talk was like, we have enough damaged, scarred, masked, eye patch villains. It's so cliche at this point that we want this to be different. So the marching orders were, he has to be African American. We want it to be a guy, and he has to be good looking. That's about all you want to give a designer, and then let them come up with stuff. That's how it's always worked best. And then if I have a problem or an idea, like a good one I had, Steeler was coming out in one of the Comic-Con sets, and the designer I knew came from Pittsburgh, and they were looking to put that gold star on his shoulder like they did for all the 50th guys. And I said, hey, Steeler's from Pittsburgh. His nickname is Steeler. Steelers are the only NFL team with a logo on one side of their helmet. Put that gold star on the Steeler side of the helmet for Steeler. And the designer's from Pittsburgh. And he was like, oh my God, it's the smartest thing ever, right? And that figure was almost like 95% finished, right? They're just looking for the last deco hit. Where does it go?
Right.
And I'm like, this makes sense, and the designer's going to like it. So it's perfect. So,
see, and that's the kind of stuff where you get that triangle of like brilliance and timing and understanding, where everything just kind of fits, and you're like,
and I thought we're off and running, and then later on we had problems with Tombstone. Or I was so proud of the female Cobra officer, and then the head sculpt was done without the scarf over the mouth. And I'm like, what are you doing? And he's like,
Yeah,
oh, I wanted to be like
with all the mines on her back.
Yeah, he wanted to be like the cartoon, the one episode of the cartoon with the female Cobra officer. And I'm like, or make it like every other Cobra officer ever, except it's female. The fact that it's female is what makes it awesome. It doesn't have to be unmasked. That's why we gave her a big blonde ponytail sticking out of the back. Because once you put the mask on, I mean, it was reusing the legs of a male trooper, right? Like, we got to call out this is female. So give her a ponytail for sure and make it bright blonde. So it sticks out off that blue, right?
Out of the back of that helmet. It does.
But it's supposed to have a mask. And by the time I saw it without a mask, it had already been sculpted. So it was done.
But the female Cobra with the red mask, she pops really well. Like those figures look good. They really do. And I still love the blonde one. You know, she's down there front and center. She's actually in front of all the masked ones. So
there you go. She's in charge.
Next question. I mean, we kind of touched on this. I don't know if you want to expand on that anymore, but Rachel's asking, what could have been of the G.I. Joe 3 movie?
I mean,
Cobra Commander gets stabbed.
Yeah, Cobra Commander getting knifed. And I've said it elsewhere. It's not breaking news. It was Tomax and Zaymot were going to be the betrayers.
See, I didn't know that. I didn't know that.
Going to be Tomax and Zaymot. They were going to play a huge role.
So were they kind of going the Coil route?
Little bit, and they were going to go with they were going to incorporate Python Patrol as a kind of almost scaled nanomite armor that was good. That was going to be really difficult, really hard to damage a guy or gal in it, but not everybody was going to have it. It wasn't like the whole Cobra Force got outfitted in it, but it would make them. It would let them. I believe in the idea, the concept was with the Rock back as Roadblock. So you wanted to have a way that even two guys, could team up on Roadblock and give him a legitimate fight. And so the idea that you put them in this armor that wasn't bulky, but had a signature kind of look that was Snake-ish, that part I thought was pretty cool. I thought you could have gotten a lot out of that. But the hope was that The Rock would come back for it. But I believe he wasn't contractually obligated. I think he had only signed on for retaliation. So the feeling was that he would be receptive, maybe. And that was the big hope, was that The Rock, because he was, I mean, we're talking 7 years ago, right? And his star, I think, has cooled a little bit. But he was white hot 7 years ago.
Yeah, he was massive. Yeah.
That was the hope. And prospectively, a Serpentor reveal at the end.
Oh.
Yeah. So, but again, there were 3 or 4 different versions of that script that got batted around. So I wouldn't say anything was ever close to happening, but those were some of the bits that got kicked around. That's
cool. Very cool.
I mean, it might have been good, might have been lousy. Who knows? But
and that's the thing. Some movies, Rachel, thanks for asking that question. But some movies, and I said this in one of my car rants where I was talking about Rise of the Beast and having a G.I. Joe scene. On paper, when you read it, it sounds dumb or it sounds great. Like The Matrix, people download fighting styles. And I was like, the first time I read that, I was like, that sounds so dumb. I'm waiting for that to bomb. And then the movie comes out and it's however, all this other stuff. And you're like, man, that movie's brilliant.
Yeah.
So yeah, it can sound fantastic or it can sound like a total turd. You know,
it could have been either. And given recent history, maybe you didn't miss much.
Yeah, that's
just saying.
I gotta say, I know we've talked about we all like what we like and we should, and obviously recent events. I don't understand the thing with, I don't know if it's Hasbro or if it's Paramount or if it's both, but this thing where like Lorenzo Di Bonaventura is still there, he's still around. Like
he's a big power broker. He's a big name. So,
I get it, but at what point do you like ditch this guy and like go pay the Russos whatever they want to like fix it?
Yeah.
Because their extraction movies, people love them. I love them. Yep. And I mean, look what they did with Captain America from the Joe Johnson movie to the Russos movie, the second movie.
Mm-hmm. Well,
They elevated him so much.
wasn't Hemsworth a finalist for Duke in Rise of Cobra?
Yes,
Didn't get
he
it,
was.
but was in the mix.
He was. He was. It was almost Chris Hemsworth.
Yeah.
And then they were like, man, we got this guy over here. He's contractually obligated. And then Channing Tatum actually knew something about G.I. Joe and was like, I don't want to. And they were like, you're going to do it.
And he at the time, he was white hot at the time.
Yes,
so
he was. Yeah, Magic
Mike
and all that other stuff.
Didn't work.
I didn't mind Channing Tatum as Duke. I minded Duke being a captain and coming into Joe as like the outsider guy. And I don't know. Whatever.
Yeah, there was a lot not to like in that.
Yeah. But there was some stuff in Rise of Cobra that you could see were love letters. The scar on his face, which is the throwback to the old 12-inch Joes. Oh, you got that real lifelike hair and your kung fu grip. They always had the winks, so there was some stuff in there that somebody put it in there like.
Yeah, and it's a little bit like Phantom Menace that I talked about, the people who crap all over retaliation. And I'm like, yeah, but John Chu, when he talked about it, about the mountain scene, right? That was
his nod to Silent Interlude.
Yeah, and he did that on the back of his grandmother's couch with his Joe figures back in the day, right?
Yeah.
So he got it, and now he's a big star director.
Oh,
right?
I thought he was great. And again, like with Retaliation, they did it just like the Sunbow series or something like that, where like Storm Shadow's back. Is anybody going to address this? No. Okay, he's just back. Okay, cool. It was perfect the way that they did that with Storm Shadow. There was no mention of it.
No, but for people who are like, "Oh, Retaliation was garbage," and I'm like, you can't tell me the hairs on your arms didn't stand up when Storm Shadow runs down the hall and stops and turns around, and you see Snake Eyes behind him in the hallway, and you're like, "Oh!"
And he just kind of silently holds up that Uzi, and you're like, "Here it comes!"
And you're like, "It is on," and it was real good. So I get that there were parts not to like, and maybe it was overall disappointing, but it's a little. You're a little, in my opinion, you're a little too jaded as a fan if you're like, that movie sucked. Well,
you had Clutch in there, you had Shipwreck in there, Grunt was in there, Xandar's in there. Like, there's characters interspersed in there that, granted, if you didn't have closed captioning on, you probably wouldn't realize it was them, but they're there.
You're not supposed to notice Xandar, right? It's like kind of his thing.
Yeah. But I don't know. I completely agree with your analogy, because whereas a lot of people crap on the Phantom Menace because of Jar Jar, because of Anakin and his whoopee stuff, that movie, it has so many long-lasting ramifications, because it's called Duel of the Fates, because if Qui-Gon Jinn dies, he can't train Anakin. Qui-Gon Jinn is all about the living force. In Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, Yoda talks like Qui-Gon talked in Episode 1, because the student taught the master after he died and retained his identity through the Force. He taught the master how to do it and showed them in the process, like, you're too rigid. This whole unifying force isn't working out. And like the Jedi Order, you got to be destroyed to be built back up. And because Qui-Gon died, it sealed Anakin's fate to fall to the dark side, because Obi-Wan was too stuck in the dogmatic practices of the unifying force. And like, there are so many brilliant themes that George Lucas woven throughout his original 6 movies that I think people lose sight of, like you point out, because of just Jar Jar Binks.
Right. Yeah. You didn't like Ewan McGregor as a young Kenobi. You didn't like Qui-Gon Jinn. Like, there's a lot to like in there.
the best Jedi ever.
Yeah. There's a lot to like. Just be careful when you're saying, "Oh, that movie sucked," right? Or that toy line sucked. And there's usually something to like.
Yeah. And agreed. There's more. There's more questions coming in.
Yeah, I don't want to ring the bell, but I got to get the kids to bed at some point. But I know we got more starred questions, so lightning round me. Let me get them all. I want to get them all.
Here we go. And I have to thank everybody in the chat for hanging out, asking Mark. I always have a problem with that, asking Mark some awesome questions and showing him some love.
No,
that
over
way.
there.
This way, yeah.
Over here, all you.
Anyway, yes, Qui-Gon Jinn, best Jedi ever. So here we go. Years of experience later, and this is Matt Rubin. What would you add to the brand now? Would you reintroduce O-rings, get modern figures back out, focus on classified? Good question.
I would do something O-ring, even if it's just through the Pulse. Just let the fans who only collect that, let them get into that. Doesn't have to be vehicles, doesn't even have to be a lot. Like that's one of the benefits of not offering anything, is you can make it a lot better by only offering a little bit. A little bit, so much better than nothing. So, and maybe let the fans vote on what do they want, right? Like say, look, we're only going to make 2 figures a year. It kind of sucks. I'd like more, but it's 2 more than we got this year. And then let them vote. And then the fans have a say in it, and you're making something they want. So yeah, I would feed O-ring out. But if you want to keep it just on Pulse, that's fine. You make more money that way anyway. So yeah, I would do that. But you gotta find some way to get kids back into it. And that may not be toy. It may very well not be toy. But you gotta find a way to get kids interested in G.I. Joe again. Have to do it.
And it's doable. And here's a follow-on question, not to drag it out, but so they said that O-rings are done, or right? It's all corporate speak. Well, we understand that. So hiatus. In their corporate speak, they're on pause, just like we know they did with the retro modern figures. So it means they're done with them. But right after that, they finally announced that Soundwave Thunder Machine that everyone had been waiting on those rumors to get confirmed for what, like 9-10 months. Yep. And then they showed O-ring figures. So in your opinion, do you think it's no more O-ring figures at all, or only when we do the Transformer crossovers?
I mean, as long as the Transformer crossovers sell, I think you'll see more of them, right? And I think
I love them.
It was funny. Those are the only things I've canceled in the last couple of years. And it was just, I didn't find the Megatron that compelling, kind of bulky.
Yeah, he has a shopping cart on his back.
Yeah, I wasn't feeling that one so much. And then they've just done the Awe Striker to death. I actually think that's a pretty damn good toy. But
the Bumblebee sculpt looks fantastic. And I have to say that Megatron, the head, that's straight out of animation.
Yeah, and the fact that you can hide all the yellow of Bumblebee inside an Awe Striker, that's pretty amazing. So
they did a good job with the transformation.
Yeah, and I'm not hating on them. I just decided, as deep as I am into classified, this is somewhere, if I got to cut, this is where I'm going to cut. But the Soundwave is phenomenal. And I'm in on the Soundwave.
And I had to get the Megatron because, right, everyone knows I have like 50 HISS tanks, and it scales perfectly.
Yeah.
Perfectly. Right next to him, you can't tell the difference. The only thing that gives it away is the armament. And that's it. It is a perfect size.
Yeah.
So
and
cool.
So I bailed on those two, but I'm back in for the Soundwave Thunder Machine.
Pull me back in.
As long as it keeps making them money, they'll keep making at least that much over.
Yeah, and that's cool with me. What Josiah is asking, what was Hasbro won for if not to make Joe animation?
He's talking about the E1 acquisition.
Yeah.
Basically, I assume it was just trying to find a way to burn $3.5 billion, right?
Right.
I was so far gone by the time that happened, but
that was the guy before Cox, or that was Cox?
The guy before Cox. So, and I didn't know him. I was in a room with him maybe twice, but the scuttle on Brian Goldner was that he just loved the Hollywood part of Hasbro. He really wanted to make movies and make Hasbro movies. Yeah. And so I'm sure that acquisition was 100%. I mean, as much money was spent, obviously the CEO was behind it. But I think it was far more important to him than it was to the new guy Chris Cox, who came from Wizards of the Coast.
Yes.
So I think he still believes in animation and entertainment, and he certainly believes in gaming because that's the world he came from.
Right.
But wow, what a kick in the gut for the overall company and for investors. And just, I mean, maybe you should salute somebody for getting out of it when they realize it's not what they hoped. But that's a tough one to spin.
Yeah. Yeah. There was a lot of investment for not a lot of return.
Yeah.
Very cool. Thanks, Josiah. And Matt Noon. If not talked about yet, we may have. Mark, did you work on any vehicles? If not, which would you have wanted if you could have?
I mean, I think it's really important. Joe is as much a vehicle line as it is a figure line.
Yep.
Has been at least since A Real American Hero. And I think that's somewhere where Classified has been late to the party, and it feels like they are finally arriving there. But because item count was so butchered when I was working on the Joe line, and not just item count, but tooling budget. I didn't have much money to create new stuff for the few new items I had. So most of what I worked on were slight tweaks of existing vehicles. So, and some of them I thought were pretty slick, like the faux striker. I mean, I just talked about there being not a lot or being too many off strikers. The truth is there aren't many molds left from the 3 3/4 time. And I was never going to get tooling to create a brand new vehicle. So the ones that we tweaked, I thought we did a pretty good job with. The faux striker's pretty good. I thought the Basilisk, the Snowcat turned Desert Cobra vehicle, I thought there was something there. And again, you have to apples and oranges it, right? Like if you didn't like the Basilisk, fine. You don't have to like everything that comes out or everything.
I love it. It's right there.
There you go. But if you didn't like it, fine. Give me a similar sized vehicle that you would have flipped from Joe to Cobra with no new tooling. You have to play by the same rules I did. So if you're like, they should have made the Basilisk, they should have made the Aspen copter that dropped the Cobra troops. Well, yeah.
That's I wanted to make tooling. I want that.
I wanted to make that too, but it would have been twice as big minimum. And it would have been 100% new tooling. That was never getting made. So
I think the Aspen should have been the HasLab versus a Sky Striker. And I understand they were like just dipping their toes in the water, but that's your HasLab, something that was never made.
I pitched the idea before HasLab, before the Pulse was doing unique stuff, the idea that we could do an Aspen and have it drop 20 troops, right? Have 20 Cobras in there. Like, just troopers and an officer here and there and a pilot, right? But a vehicle that's iconic, that's been around forever, that never got made. I would love to have done something like that. The one that we were working on that didn't get made was we were going to do a box set where there were a couple. We were doing an Arctic Dragonfly, which would have been in white and a frosted blue canopy kind of. And I was going to have it come with the hook, obviously, right? But it was going to be, we were going to have tow cables that would have worked on the Wolverine and the Mauler too. So we would have had rubberized tow cables that you could have retrofitted to old stuff. And we were going to give you like 3. So you
into their sling load hooks. Yeah, that's brilliant.
You could use 1 on the set and 2 on your old stuff if you wanted to. And the thing they were after that Cobra was trying to stop them from getting was the last piece of the mass device. The one that nobody could find because it was such a limited release item. It was all about making that stuff available again if it was really hard to find. So that's what we did with Alpine in a box set, right? We wanted to, it should never be that hard to find a regular figure or item. So we were working on that. And then I think it was another Rattler. I forget exactly what it was, but the Joe vehicle was going to be the Hammer, which I think is a fantastic Jeep. And they still, back then, they still had the tooling for it. So, and the Hammer was so big that other than the foot pegs on the side, which wouldn't have worked with 50th and 25th anniversary figs,
right.
25th figs fit in it pretty good. Because it was always...
That's the challenge, is getting those moderns into the old vehicles, because that's what I've got.
It was always a little oversized for 3 3/4 Joes. And the way guys fit in was a waist snap.
Yep.
So of all the things that changed size, the waist didn't change that much. And so that one would have worked with modern figures. And we were going to have version 2 rock and roll driving it. But when it eventually didn't happen, Toys R Us eventually decided they didn't want big vehicle sets anymore. Right. And that's when we gave Brian Savage the green light to make version 2 rock and roll through the club. Yeah. Because the club always...
Great figure.
Great fig. But they always asked Hasbro first, these are the guys we want to make. And they kind of knew their role, right? No offense, because we love Brian. Brian Savage and the guys are great to work with. But they wouldn't request A+ names. They kind of played in that B to B- area, guys we weren't making or planning to make. And by and large, 90% of what they asked for, we greenlit. But rock and roll version 2, they wanted, and we said, no, we're going to make him. And then when we didn't, we gave them back to them and said, yeah, fine, you guys make this one. And they did a great job.
I wish a modern version of the hammer would have happened, because the original hammer is hard to find complete. It is really large and it's expensive.
Yeah.
Because it's just all the accessories and the missiles and the guns and the antennas. That vehicle's a nightmare. It's one of the few I don't have.
Yeah, it's a great toy, and it holds up. Yeah. And part of the big question is size-wise, because one of the funny bits when we said we were going to do a Dragonfly, because we had the original Dragonfly tooling, right? I said, is Wild Bill going to fit in that at 4 inches? Because he barely fits originally, right?
Yeah,
it's a pretty tight squeeze in that cockpit. And my designer buddy, the Tombstone guy, was like, yeah, it's no problem. And when I got the prototype in, it only worked by taking his web gear off and his hat off and sinking his feet into the chin turret, because it's hollow, right?
All the way down like that.
And even still, his face was like pressed up against it was not good. But technically, could you close the cockpit? Yeah, you technically could.
I have one of those modern green shirts sitting in one of my Off-Strikers, and he's kind of like this against the roll cage. Yeah, I just smash him down in there. But
of them all, though, I wish we could have made that, because that pure Snow White Dragonfly is pretty cool looking. Yeah.
Very cool. Patrick Strauko is asking, would a character based on you be a Joe or a Cobra?
Ooh, that's a good call. I'm not good. I'm not good at enough of anything to be a Joe, so I probably would have been a rank and file Cobra. Anything that keeps me out of the sun. The one funny bit, when I was working with the writer, the gal who wrote the file cards at the time, she sent me a Night Fox file card, and the notes I gave her were, this guy came with one of the dumb thumbprint file cards that doesn't even say where they're from or the real name. I think they had their name, but not where they're from. And I said, here's the deal. These are the states that don't have much Joe representation. And the one I pointed out was Delaware. There's never been a Joe from Delaware. It's the only state that hasn't produced a member of the G.I. Joe team. And I ran that by Daryl, and he didn't know that. And he said, you know what? Let's save that. Maybe there's a reason why no Joes come from Delaware. So I don't know if there was going to be a big Cobra stronghold in Delaware or what. But Daryl liked that there was one state that didn't have any Joes. So Delaware was off to the side.
And that would be a funny spin if there was a massive Cobra stronghold in the first state.
Yeah, and because of the funky rules there, that's where like half the companies are incorporated, right?
Yeah,
are in Delaware.
Wacky.
So something weird's going on in Delaware. Anyway, there were a couple states that only had one Joe ever, and one of them's Oregon. I'm from Oregon, and so it was a big deal to me as a kid when Dial Tone came out, because he was from Eugene, right? Hey, from my neck of the woods, kind of. And so I gave her the list, and she knew I was from Oregon. And so when I got the file cards back to proofread, they had Night Fox from Crescent City, Oregon. And I'm like, that's cool, because I just met this gal. And she was a sweetheart, great, and a very talented writer. And so she made him from Oregon as a shadow to me, which I loved. But the sad part is there is no such thing as Crescent City, Oregon. There's a Crescent City, California, which is Northern California near the border. And there's a Crescent, Oregon, which is about an hour south. And so I wrote her back, you gotta be really careful. It's just like a designer, right? Working with a writer when you're editing them as a marketer. Right. And so I wrote her back and said, hey, I love the shadow. The one thing is he can be from Crescent, Oregon. He can be from Crescent City, California. There are a ton of Joes from California, though. Or he can be from Crescent, Oregon. But there is no Crescent City, Oregon. And I had done a bunch of research to make sure I was right. And I said, I only know this because I grew up in Bend, Oregon. And so I sent it back to her. And then a day later, she sent it back to me. And she said, I fixed it. I think you'll like it. And then I opened the file, and Night Fox is now from Bend, Oregon. So he's from my hometown. So it's not me. It was never supposed to be me. But it's from my hometown. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, which is still rad. And it has the last Blockbuster.
Yeah, there you go. I opened that store.
No way. Really?
Yeah, yep.
That's rad.
Same guy owns it. It's fantastic. Go to it. But the epilogue to the story, when the box set came out, I looked up my old collecting partner, Eric, who's architect in Bend now. And I sent that set to him at his architect firm. Hadn't been in touch with him in, God, 30 years probably. But it just arrived at his firm, and he opened it up, and it said, "Hey, this is the first Joe from Bend,
This is
Oregon."
the same kid with the $40 in the My
Yeah,
Hasbro collection.
the
That's
$40.
awesome.
Yeah,
That's super cool.
So he and I reconnected over that, and it was just kind of a one-off, but it was really cool. And so he got an off striker with that.
God, that is so cool.
Yeah,
that is super cool. Okay, trucking on. Okay, so DJ 5-Ash, Mark, what would be your next HasLab if you were back in charge?
Well, the one I trumpeted, the one I thought we would get after the hiss, I thought we'd get a vamp, just because of the repaint options for it.
Yeah,
It wouldn't take much
Stinger,
tooling.
Yeah.
Stinger, a Mark II, but cool. It coming to standard retail is even better.
Good.
Right? Yeah, and I think the Dragonfly, when they announced the price on it, it was a lot lower than I thought it would be.
It was, yeah.
Right? So I give them a lot of credit for that. The one, my pie in the sky, the one thing, man, that 83 headquarters is pretty flat. It's a lot of dead air, really. It wouldn't be that much plastic.
Yeah, you guys were talking about this last night.
Oh, I think that's not most of the pie in the sky stuff classified fans throw out there is lunacy, right? You're never going to get.
You always hear them say flag, and I'm like, get out of here with that.
You're not getting a whale. You're not getting a whale. You're not getting any of that.
No.
Now I would love to see a full on tank, a Mauler or a Mobat. I think that's
a Mauler for sure. Yeah,
Mauler's a cooler tank. So yeah, and you could
make down inside hatches.
Yeah, and you could have heavy metal, and you could have Steeler be, a stretch goal or something.
Sure,
fine.
Yeah.
Either of that is fine. But yeah, I think you need a big tank, and maybe you need the tank before you pitch the headquarters, because now you have a vamp and a Mobat or a Mauler to put in the base where they
and the Dragonfly on the freaking helipad,
because you put the helipad on top of the jail, otherwise Storm Shadow just climbs right out. So
exactly, or my Storm Shadow statue falls on top of it and breaks my jail cell, which it did. Now
so
I remember
he broke into jail.
Yeah, he with his head. If they made that classified, and I said this last night in your guys' live chat, I would buy it because it would be massive. And I would put my 1/18 scale Joes in it.
Yeah,
straight up. I would do that.
I mean, if you think about the original the Sunbow cartoon, that headquarters looked nothing like the 83 headquarters.
Yeah, because the 83 one is based on the one from the comics where they drop it in. It's like a modular little plug and play base. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's pretty much impenetrable unless you come at it from the back, and then you just walk in.
Or you get two and you put them back to back. Yeah.
So I guess, DJ, I'll take that back. We'll do a Mauler, because you could do a Mauler for 320 probably, right?
Sure. Don't make it motorized.
Don't make it motorized. And then because it's not for kids. And then once you have your tank, if Super 7 can make that Third Earth Thundercats.
Oh, the Cat Slayer.
Yeah, and I'm not a Thundercats guy,
but it's huge and it's impressive.
They're doing it. Yeah, if they can do Eternia somewhere,
Mattel redid Eternia and Snake Mountain.
If you did the 83 headquarters scaled for classified guys, I would drop 500 on that. I think most collectors would. So they made the sail barge. The sail barge isn't even cool.
Yeah, the Keaton is huge. I walked past the box 2 Joe Fests ago, and it was like to hear on me.
Yeah.
That's massive.
That's the only thing it has going for 2 things. It's gigantic, and it's never been done.
But it also has usable lower level space, unlike a certain somebody over here, right?
If you don't actually have a flag, when you get one and assemble it, it's kind of disappointing.
Yeah, you have to build.
You have to trick it out like you did.
Yeah, you have to. Otherwise, it's just like cool. It's just it's a deck. That's it. Yeah. But it's that mark of like a diehard Joe. Whatever.
Look, you're either there are a lot of GI Joe fans, right? But you're either in the Admirals Club or
you're not.
That's it.
Yeah. Exactly. Very cool. Thanks, DJ. Let me get rid of that. And then Keith from KB Jodographs. Chad, remember the interrogator photo you shared previously? Oh, that was more a question for me. Yes, I do. And I love it. Again, he's very awesome.
More interrogator.
Yep. And then Josiah, Is there any plan to get Mark Weber, aka you, and Spectre Creative together for a really wonky business-focused podcast episode anytime soon?
I mean, there's
Scott
nothing,
Island, right?
yeah, there's nothing planned. But like I said, dude, as long as there's snacks, I'll be there.
Yep, I can attest to that.
Yep.
Very cool. All right, cool. And Rachel Salinas, Mark, what's going to go on the second shelf of your display case?
This is funny because it was always a gag I ran on WOJM was that I wasn't a real toy podcaster because I didn't have shelves of toys behind me. And then I got this. I was working at a display case company, and this was one they had on the side because someone had got one shipped to them. It's like a $1,200 case, and one of the shelves was cracked, and they didn't have replacement shelves. So they took one shelf out of this and sent it to the customer to make them happy. And it sat there for months with a sign on it saying, "Do not put it in inventory because there's a piece missing from it." And I would watch in the legit warehouse, I would watch forklifts move around this thing all the time. I knew they hated it, and there was no plan for it. So finally I'm like, look, is that available for a discount? I mean, it's open and it's not complete, but yeah, I'd take it off. I'd be happy to take it off your hands if the price is right. And they were like, for God's sake, Webb, just take it. They wanted it gone so bad.
Just get it out of my face.
Yeah, so I got this like $1,200 beautiful case. It's not lit up because it puts too much backlight on me and I fade like a ghost into it. But there's no plan to actually dress it up because we want to put it in the basement, right? But I got to clean the basement first because we're planning maybe some stuff down there. So there's no point in moving it down the stairs only to have to move it back up. That thing down the stairs is going to be a pain in the ass. So it was on the other side of the main room here on the main floor. And my daughter kept backing her chair into it, getting up from the dinner table. And it's not her fault. There wasn't enough room.
Right.
So I moved it over here into the most out of the way corner just to help my daughter get out and so she wouldn't break it. So there was never a plan to dress it up. I put some Masterpiece guys up there on the top from Transformers, but I suppose like I change out over here. I change out the shirt every couple episodes.
I love that jersey. Yeah.
The jerseys, you wouldn't believe it. They found so many random stuff to put in the internal Hasbro toy shop, and it was just stuff they wanted gone. And I got that two jerseys like that, $5 each. Like total win. Once in a while.
I love you and I hate you at the same time.
Right? And the only bummer is it's got the paratrooper lower on it, and it's kind of cheesy. And unfortunately, it isn't like stitched onto it. You couldn't seam rip that guy off and have like just a solid looking G.I. Joe. No, it's part of the actual fabric.
Oh, okay.
So it's either there or you've got a paratrooper sized hole in your stomach. So, but for $5, you can't.
Hey, it still looks rad behind you.
Yeah, it's good on the shelf. And it was big enough that I could wear it if I wanted to. So,
right on. Thanks, Rachel. And then Keith Bradshaw, KB Jodographs, once again, thoughts on the new 1/6 scale Destro from 3.0?
I think all the 3.0 stuff is great. But it's for me, it's the scale thing again, right?
Yep.
The only 12-inch Joes, like from the mid-90s stuff, I have Ace because I liked Ace, and I have Snake Eyes. Everyone liked Snake Eyes.
Yeah, I got a couple.
And I think I got the Sideshow stuff when it came out, right? Gorgeous. But on my McFarlane salary, which wasn't anywhere near my Hasbro salary, I was like, I can't swim in that pool, right? If they come out with Interrogator or Ace or Steeler, I could dive in maybe once, but I can't get all of them because they're all great. So I ended up getting a Baroness somewhere kind of cheap, like half price somehow. So I had a Baroness, and then one of the brand managers who was on Joe before me had been given to him a Destro. So I have a Destro and a Baroness, and that's cool because they're a match set.
Yeah.
But I can't swim in that water. If you can, God bless you. And I wish them nothing but success. I think they look outstanding. I've never handled one myself, but I'm not.
If they did a low light, I might snag a low light. And I have those vinyl statues that they did at GameStop. I have the Baroness and the Destro because they look so good together.
I love those. I think that's honestly the best thing the brand is doing right now.
Yeah, that's
between
Serpentor with that pose. He looks so
yeah.
good.
Yeah, and the well, maybe we're talking about different things, but the diamond stuff that's coming out now, the $50 or $60 stuff.
Oh yeah.
There's a Baroness that's great with I think an interlocking base with Destro. There's a Snake Eyes. There's a that's the Joe Colton that's coming out, the Adventure Team, and they're sensational. I should put those in the case behind me.
Yeah, I'm actually talking about these guys.
Oh yeah, those guys are great too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just knocked her base on the floor.
Oh.
Well, because she has the weird wonky because of her heels.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love them.
Yep,
They're
those
just
are slick.
They're beautiful.
Those are slick. Cool. So, and there's plenty of stuff like that I like, that I hope does well. That if I had unlimited pockets, you bet I'd have those here.
Same.
But
yeah.
We all kind of pick and choose.
Yeah, money, space, all that stuff. That's the theme. And then Drew G, what's up? Drew says, did the writer's strike hurt that script for the first movie?
Not that I know of, but I wasn't on the brand for the first movie, and that's the kind of question you don't ask. so yeah, I honestly,
did the writer's strike make this movie suck? Hi, I'm new.
I honestly don't know. And even though the people were there that you could have asked, although I do know that they offered Daryl the chance to come back to Joe from Star Wars before the movie came out. And he read the script and went, yeah, I don't need to be in charge of that right now.
Is Daryl still there?
No, Daryl is semi-retired, working on his own projects. I think he has family in Tennessee. So he actually moved. He's not even in Rhode Island anymore. But we still brush against each other now and then. I got nothing but praise for Daryl the Priest.
Oh, yeah.
And he's living his best life, I think, down in Tennessee, singing Rocky Top.
Cool. Every time I watch The Toys That Made Us, and I still watch it, and I see Daryl, I'm like, I want to talk to that dude someday.
Yeah,
like Daryl the Priest and Vinny DeLevia, they're on my list. Those two guys are on my list.
I've only talked to Vinny once or twice, but great guy. Yeah. He's still, I think he works for Tommy.
Out here. Vinny's on my list, and I know that Carson Metaxas talks to him, and I'm like, I'm gonna
Yeah, Vinny, I chatted him up kind of out of nowhere. He doesn't know me, but I reached out to him, and yeah, he's totally approachable. And Daryl's great. My favorite Daryl story is we were at it was the Joe Con in Colorado Springs, maybe. Anyway, and he went to go run the floor, right? Because he's a collector first and foremost.
Yeah.
And so I'm holding down the table and showing off the booth. And he comes literally skipping back with a Cobra bug, right? And he's so excited about it, right? And I'm like, well, all right, what you got, Daryl? And he shows me the bug, like showing your newborn to your parents.
Look at my puppy.
Yeah. And I'm like, that's great. And he goes, I know, right? It's almost complete and it's in great condition. Take a look. And he turns it around for me. And I'm like, yeah, that's great. And I said, but I know you have at least two of those. Right. And he's like, yeah, I got one in box. I got the European version. He's got everything. But he found a good one at a cheap price. And he was so excited about it. And then I said, where are you going to put that? Right. Because we're kind of limited in our booth space here. Right. And he's like, oh, because we're booked. We're not going to get back to our room for hours. And he went, well, I'll just tuck it on the bottom shelf there behind the sign. Right, because we have a sign at the bottom saying, come to our panel tomorrow. And I said, sure. If you put a bug because we're making 4-inch figures at that point, right? If you put a bug inside the official Hasbro new cabinet, everybody is going to think it's an Easter egg.
You see they're coming out with a new bug?
Yeah. and he was like, nah, they know better. And I'm like, whatever. So he went off to go do something. And for the next hour and a half, after about 10 minutes, I altered my spiel and I started with, hey, pleased to meet you. I'm Mark Weber from the G.I. Joe team. We are not making a bug.
Disregard this toy over here.
Let's just get that out right away. But yeah, everybody thought for sure that, there's a bug coming. And the bug's great. But no.
That's awesome. That's fantastic.
I remember the internet was abuzz that night on the Joe boards about the potential for a bug. And that was fueled only by Daryl finding one at a cheap price. But you don't find too many people who are in charge of a brand, right? Who are actually that excited about any product, even new product. So that's what made Daryl exceptional. And I think, his loss is still felt there today. Not just his, by the way.
Not just his.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Once in a while in one of their live streams, somebody will just ask, "Where's Mark?" with a question mark. And anytime I see that, love it.
Got him.
Love it. Love it. It's not them, right? It's not
right.
them.
Yeah, it's not them.
No, and Lenny, the designer, was one of my best friends at Hasbro. He's a great designer and a wonderful guy. So I'm not throwing shade at them. It does my heart proud to be remembered. So
yeah, and that's good, right? You leave your mark on stuff. And
yeah, in the end, I lost my dream job, right? That stings. But in the end, looking back at it, I got the chance to work on my favorite brand ever, right? And if you'd have told me on the way in that this is how it's going to go through no fault of your own, I still would have taken it. Of course, I would have taken it.
Yeah.
So I think that's where I finally got to quasi okay with it, was just being happy that I had the opportunity at all.
Yeah, and that's rad. And you joined such a long list of people that are like just amazing at what they did and what they, including you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the way that you guys positively affected like people's childhoods and stuff. Like when I talked to Kirk Bazigian, I was like, and Ron Rudat face to face, and Larry Hama face to face, and so many others. I say, like, what you guys did, it set my entire life. Like everything that I've ever done is because of G.I. Joe.
Mm-hmm.
All of it since 1982. Like my life was pretty much set in stone. My entire adult career in the military.
And I know they
have no response. They're just like,
yeah, and not in any way to cheapen your own path, but I know they hear that a lot. That a lot of kids became fond of and learned what military service was like, especially through the comic, because it was more realistic, right? Yeah. And not Pollyanna, right? Larry didn't paint it as sunshine and rainbows being in the military.
No.
But there's a ton of enlisted and retired and veterans who served our country because of what Kirk and Ron and Larry and the crew did. And that's a hell of a legacy.
Point that Larry gives out coins to all the service members and veterans that come and see him, and like that's one of those. Man, that's cool.
Yeah, that's always cool. Like I raised my hand at a panel the year after I'd left Hasbro, and one of Kirk's panels, I raised my hand and said, "Where's the J and Lady J come from?" Because I didn't know, I'd never heard. But when he called on me, he said, "Yes, Mark." And I'm like, oh, again, especially, they're all great, right? But Kirk did what I did, right? Far better and at a far more pivotal time. So I'm not comparing myself to Kirk, but he's special to me because he did what I tried to do for a couple of years. So
because you carried on that lineage.
Yeah.
And I gotta say, like, I couldn't stop calling Kirk sir, and he got mad at me, and that's pretty funny. I told myself, I was like, okay, so when you're talking to Mark, don't call him Mr. Weber.
No.
Call him Mark.
No. And I'm not trying to overplay it. I was only on the brand for 2.5 years. We didn't make my stuff.
I don't care because I have a ton of stuff that I love that you did. Like that 50th anniversary low light, right? Mm-hmm. When I talked to Bobby about it, he was like, oh, I only worked on this part of it. I was like, I don't care. I love that figure. I love all his accessories. I don't care what you did or didn't work on. He is my number one Joe.
One of the funny things is one of the difficulties, not just the item count or the limited tooling budget, but we had to follow Pursuit of Cobra, right?
Yeah. Pursuit of Cobra.
Which was John Warden's opus, basically, right? Because they kind of lost track of G.I. Joe after that first movie. And so they've still had massive item count and huge tooling budgets. So they could do whatever they wanted. You think we could make Jungle Viper now? Right? With all of that tooling?
All that stuff and the sci-fi with the numerous heads and the back metalized Viper.
There's Warden himself talks about it. And he was like, they couldn't believe the stuff they got away with. Right? And then we had to follow that with item count of 3 and a tooling budget of $1.50. Like,
Yeah.
so I am really proud of what we got made because we had to be really creative. And those got gigantic shoes to not fill, but try to follow. But yeah, I think we did good for, I always call it groceries, right? We cooked pretty damn good for the groceries we were allowed.
Yep. Right. You got to make the best meal that you can with what you got.
That's it. Hamburger Helper's cheap, but it tastes good.
Hell yeah, it tastes good. I'm a big fan of ramen myself. But speaking of good tasting, I don't know if that's good or bad segue, but Zazel from Sergeant Slaughter Slaughterhouse is here, and we always love Zazel. Thanks for being here, buddy. And he asked, here's a question, since we're on the questions. Are we still fighting in the chat or not? I don't know who was fighting in this chat, but maybe it's a joke about what I posted about yesterday. I wasn't fighting with anyone, to be fair.
No, I think we're all getting along. Look, anybody who wants to have me on their show is a friend.
Oh, I've always had nothing but love and respect for you, Mark.
I appreciate that.
I appreciate you being here. You definitely honor me by hanging out with me and just talking Joe for a little bit.
I mean, I think I give a little, even though it's been a while, I give a bit of an insider perspective. And there are so many people out there doing their thing who are caustic and negative about it. And I'm just happy that Joe is kind of, if not thriving, at least it's kind of, I don't know if rolling's the right word, but at least we have a consistent flow of product. Yeah. And that has been stop and go over the last 20 years. So I like where we're at right now. It can be better, sure. I hope it gets better, but I'm just kind of grateful that we have stuff, because there are years. I mean, we were doing What's on Joe Mind in years where there was no product. That's a tough show every week.
Yeah, because you're like, so what are we going to talk about? I have a show about 90s Joes, right? That's only a finite couple of years. Yeah. And like, there are some times where I'm like, man, I can't think of a topic. Like, so I get it. I feel you. So Matt Rubin's asking, with the current prices for backed play sets, what do you think of a HasLab 1/18 scale Terrordrome?
Man, I just think that, remember when Star Wars Black made a legit 6-inch scale TIE fighter?
Yep.
And the
TIE fighter?
People who bought it and opened it usually put glass over it and made it an end table, because that's how big it was. Like, I don't think I can stress the size difference between the 83 headquarters and the Terrordrome. Like, with the function, you'd have to have a fire bat and a functional elevator. That thing is, if you count the panels, it's 3 levels high. Like, yeah. I love the Terrordrome. Love it. But I think if your 83 headquarters at classified scale is 500 minimum, right? Probably 500 to 600, somewhere in there. I think your Terrordrome is like 800 to 900.
I think he's asking, what do you think of the possibility of a new 1/18 scale?
Oh, 1/18th. I'm sorry. They're making such little 1/18 stuff right now that I wouldn't believe that Terrordrome is close, right? All they're making is the Transformer stuff right now.
Yeah. Hey, speaking of 1/18 scale, I'm going to piggyback off of Matt Rubin here. What do you think about that Super 7 Cobra airship thing?
I mean, I love it because it's never been made.
Right.
And I think they're really, really and I know a couple of the guys there from McFarlane days. I think it's great that they're diving into stuff that never got made. Temple guards and skeletons, and we'll see Honolulu before you know it, right? They know exactly where they're allowed to play. The one thing I think is really interesting is they made Quinn, right?
Yep.
And Quinn is not a Sunbow character at all.
No.
He's a Marvel character so I'm wondering where that line is drawn, because I haven't seen them dip in. But, dude, there's a lot there for guys that never really got made or barely got made, like Dr. Venom and Scarface and the original General Flag with the big black glasses. And there's a lot there if they're allowed to swim in that pool, too. So the Quinn thing was always interesting to me.
Yeah, because he's not Sunbow.
Yeah, he's not.
Then you see the female Stratoviper, and you see on and on and on, and they just announced that G.I. Joe pilot and a couple other crazy things.
Yeah, so it seems like they play pretty securely with anything Sunbow, but that Quinn's really interesting to me Does that mean they can do more, or did they make Quinn and the approval team missed it, right? And was like, oh crap,
they made a red
actually,
laser or a red shadow, right? They just
they changed the
randomly made a
name a little
red
bit.
shadow.
So he's kind of like a new character, even though we all know what he's supposed to be, right?
Right.
Yeah. So, but interesting. That's my big wonder with Super 7. Can they do more like that, or was that an oops and that'll never happen again?
I think the airship idea is cool. When you look at the Millennium Falcon, the original Millennium, well, they used the same mold from 78 all the way to 85, but they scaled that down where they needed to. But this Cobra airship, it looks like they just smushed the whole thing, and it looks like a flying saucer.
Yeah, I like the idea. I'm not sure the execution is what we're going to want to see, but
I'm not 100% against it. I was like, oh, cool. But then I was like, I think I need to look at this a little more before I say, yeah, I'm going to dump a lot of money on it.
Yeah, and I don't know that it's iconic because it was only in the intro and that's it, pretty much, right?
Yeah.
So
it was like the other airship, the not helicarrier.
Right.
And then Matt Rubin's also asking, I know about Steeler. What are the other Joes from Pennsylvania?
Ooh, give me a minute, or we'll move to something else, and I'll find it because I've got my file.
Moving on. Backwoods wants to know, how's your week so far?
Hey, it's almost soccer season, so that's always good for me. I appreciate.
You're a huge sports nut. I love that you always talk about sports.
Yeah, well, I did sports radio first,
That's
so I'm a big sports, and I've always been a pro wrestling fan, and that's next to sports. And I played soccer. That's my favorite. It was my favorite sport to play and to coach. And my kids both play soccer, so that's why there's nothing quite like watching my kids play the sport that meant the most to me personally. So, and I wanted them to be goal scorers and glory hounds, and they both ended up stay-at-home murderous defensemen like their old man. So, on some level, I'm happy about that too.
So you're real big on sports. You spent some time in like the New England area, obviously. Where are you at with lacrosse? Because I know that's like a big New England kind of thing.
It is. And it was nothing in Oregon. It didn't exist. When I was
no.
So, and there was
not in Florida when I lived down there. Not out here where I live. Like lacrosse is just it's a tri-state New England thing only, but it's huge.
Big in Maryland too for some reason, but okay. But it is very East Coast.
Yeah,
I never played it, and it's a bit of a scuffle for me too, because sometimes the kids I want playing soccer choose lacrosse. But I don't have any hate for it, and it's fine. Not my thing, but it's fine. Okay, I got your Pennsylvania Joes here.
Bam!
And this was something one of the first things I did when there was downtime, because I didn't have that much product to work on, was build out this kind of thing. And so I looked at all of them. And so you've got Windmills from Allentown, Sideswipe is from Philly, Depth Charge is from Pittsburgh. I know some of these guys are forgettable, but Steelers from Pittsburgh. That's it. So you got 4.
Cool.
And really, Sideswipe and Depth Charge are pretty forgettable, but Windmill, not bad.
There you go. Cool. And then last question, unless another one sneaks in, and I know you got to get going.
Yeah.
Last question is from Draws. Mark, what was your favorite vehicle you got to see get designed?
I wish I had a better answer, but we weren't doing new vehicles then, really. So the one that I had a little bit of a thumbprint on was the Soundwave Hiss tank that didn't transform, right? But the original pitch, he's right back there.
God, I love it.
The pitch that they had
told me on the San Diego Comic-Con crossovers was that vehicle. Yeah.
Well, they had the original pitch was, and I loved that the turret had Soundwave's cannons on it.
Yeah.
But they were originally, like the original Soundwave toy came with both of those. They were identical, and they had the silver missiles that fit into them.
Yep.
But the classic, the iconic look for Soundwave was to have one as a shoulder cannon without the missile. Right?
Yeah. With the
so it either looked like a Gatling cannon or a bunch of missiles in a circle.
Yeah.
That's the iconic look. I get it.
Yeah,
but,
like the pepper shaker.
Yeah, when I joined I think it was when I joined the Joe brand, they were working on that, and they were only going to include one silver missile, because Soundwave iconically only uses one in the blaster.
Right.
But my immediate pitch, you got to be careful, especially as the new guy on the team, is it's going to make the Hiss tank look ridiculous to have the two identical cannons on the turret, but only one missile. It'll look unfinished. And if it's removable, just include a second missile. And people can pull it out if they don't want it, or both of them out if they don't want it.
Sure.
But give them the option to make it what they want, especially when you're pretending this is a Transformer or a Cobra vehicle or both.
Yep.
And that's when I got to play along when I was around for more of the development. That's what we did with Power Glide as the Red Rattler. We made sure the sticker sheet had Joe emblems, had Cobra emblems, had Autobot emblems. So if he's Power Glide to you, great. If he's a Crimson Rattler for the twins to sit in, God bless you, right? If it's a G.I. Joe commandeered Rattler that they're turning around, cool. I don't care.
Yeah.
And I don't think
the brilliance of that, because I'm not a big fan of like crossing faction vehicles and stuff. So I was like, I can make it Cobra.
That's it, right? Yeah. And then, I mean, there have been enough Crimson, and Baroness is a pilot, right?
Yeah.
Drop Crimson Baroness in it and put whoever you want in the gunners.
Done and done.
Yeah. So I liked that. I liked it when we were able to make stuff that didn't prescribe how it had to be used, especially if it's just stickers. Stickers don't cost anything.
Yeah.
So
the Soundwave Hiss with the armament on that, and the Shockwave Hiss with his very iconic kind of flattish cannon, make those vehicles visually distinguishable as Soundwave and Shockwave. And I love those tanks.
Totally good. And the Shockwave wasn't me, and the Jetfire Sky Striker was not me, but I thought they were done so well. There you go.
I'm a huge fan of that.
I wanted to make sure that I was continuing that tradition and maybe improving on it, because I thought those were slick.
Yeah. The Soundwave Hiss, I know we're going to wrap it up, but that completely, I saw that vehicle and I was like, no, I need to buy all those sets. The only one I didn't get was the Starscream Sky Striker, because I thought that was a little too on the nose, and he's an F-15, and I was like, that one I'll pass on.
I was always, because I was my holy trinity of Transformers is Grimlock, Prowl, Skywarp. So I was always hoping that if they made Starscream, maybe they'd make Skywarp down the road, and it never quite happened. The one big win in that is the Cobra Commander figure is slick, and he comes with a really good Megatron.
Yeah, I do have the figure, but I just eBayed that figure. But I took Joe's Storm Eagles and I made the 3 original G1 Seekers out of Storm Eagles. I just got repro stickers and painted them all, and boop.
There you go.
So they work well as that YF-23, but very cool. I'm going to hit the chat one more time. And Woodman says, thanks to us both. Mark, thank you for the amazing job on my lifelong favorite toy.
I appreciate it. Like, as I get further and further from it, I never try to overplay how long I was there or how much that I did, but I did for a job, a position that was really just kicked around for 20 years almost. I really loved the opportunity, and I love that I was able to do a few things that are memorable given the restrictions that we had on the brand at that point.
Yeah. And again, like, I just have to echo what Woodman says, what AbsorbVids says. Some of the pieces of my collection that are my absolute favorites are stuff that have your signature on them. And every time I come in here, I always look to certain stuff. The Soundwave is one of them. That's what led me to make the Megatron, the low light, on and on. Like, I love Tombstone. I think he's rad. I appreciate Shooter being in my OG-13 where I think she belongs. So
I appreciate it. And yeah, and it means a lot. It means a lot to me. I'll always look back on it as one of the favorite parts of my life. Was being able to work on Joe and Transformers too. But Joe was always the closest thing to my heart. So being able to put a small thumbprint on the overall brand, I'm proud of that.
Yeah, that's very cool. And then Anthony Romo says, Mark, you're the best. Matt Noon says, thank you. Bunch of thank yous and shout outs to you, Mark. So thanks again for being here with everybody. Last question of the night.
This is a good one.
Yes, that's a really good question. You think you would ever do anything with Bobby on Action Force?
I love Bobby, but Bobby's rolling on his own pretty much. But when he was just getting started, I offered to write file cards for him because I love writing file cards, and some of them stuck and some of them didn't, and that's totally fine. It's Valaverse for a reason, right? It's his universe. But the one that absolutely stuck was Bone Collector from Wave One.
Yeah,
That
was you.
That's my file card. Well, he's the worst of the worst, right?
Yeah.
And I'm an ASU grad, so why do you think he's from Tucson, right? He's a stinking U of A Wildcat, right? Total villain.
Awesome.
So there's a little Easter egg, and so I wrote that one, and that one stuck. It might have been the only one that stuck, but I also the first female figure, Eclipse. That's my name. I didn't like the name Bobby had for her originally, and I said this is a cool name that has never been used in anything really.
Yeah, it's a rad name.
Yeah, so I'm like, and I didn't, if you want to ask Bobby what the original name was, go ahead. But I didn't care for it. All the rest of his code names I totally down with. But there was one I didn't like, and I offered up Eclipse. So yeah, I've got a tiny little thumbprint on some Action Force stuff too.
That's really cool.
But that was a long,
Eclipse,
that's when he was planning it. That was a good 2 years probably before it even came out. So that was a long time ago, and he's been rolling on his own, I think, ever since. So I don't think Bobby needs my help. If he wants to call, hey, I'm always happy to help. But Bobby's doing his own thing.
You're easy to get a hold of.
Yeah, I'm not hard. I'm a 6'2" albino redhead. I'm hard to lose, right? But Bobby's, I think, doing his own thing. All on his own, and doing just fine. So if he wants to call, sure. But if he doesn't, no hard feelings. I'm proud of Bobby for being, again, losing his dream job just like I did. And for saying, you know what, I'll make it myself. So,
and he, kudos to him. And I know that obviously he talks highly of you and the time that you guys spent together. And I always appreciate the fact that, the story's known of, him, he made waves and he was one of the people that got cut. And the fact that he was always very much like focus driven, and now it's paying off like massive dividends for him. So
yeah,
that's awesome.
Bobby suffers no fools.
Nope.
And he's a little bit aggressive, a little bit combative, but he and I get along. So I assume that speaks well of me. We'll see.
Yeah, I get along with him too, and whatever, we all have our flavors, and it is what it is. And we're gonna make this the last comment of the night. So there you go, Kokomo Toys.
Our friends at Kokomo Toys.
Yeah, from our friends at Kokomo Toys. Mark, again, thank you so much for hanging out with me. Everybody in the chat, thank you for hanging out with me and Mark and suffering my cat.
Right?
I told you he would make an appearance. Look at him.
He's a black cat. That's good luck.
Yeah, it's one of my 2 black cats, but yeah, very cool.
Hey, I appreciate the invite. Love talking to Joe. We can absolutely do this again sometime. Because that's the beautiful thing about G.I. Joe. It's been around so long, and there's so many cool things about it. There's always something to talk about.
Yeah, and it would absolutely be my pleasure to do this again sometime. When's the next time everybody can see you? Next Tuesday?
I mean, I'm on What's on Joe Mind every Tuesday night. So always a pleasure on there. And then it's the off season right now, but my side project and one of my real passions is Eternal Baseball. So it's the best rosters of all time for every team competing live against each other. So if you want to see who's better, Shohei Ohtani or Babe Ruth? I don't know. They play against each other in my league. So give that a shot if you want. We start after the World Series. So we try to maximize the offseason when there's no baseball. But if you love baseball, check out eternalbaseball.com. I think you'll like it.
I'm going to go check that out. And anybody else who loves baseball, America's pastime, go check that out. So I'm definitely going to do that. Is there maybe a cameo of Paul O'Neill standing there talking to his bat?
Right, or doing the Tai Chi in the outfield? Yeah.
I used to love when he would stand there and just talk to his bat. Like, I can't believe you missed that.
Right. The thing I loved about O'Neill was he was a tinderbox. He was a TNT waiting to go off at any moment. Yeah. But it was only ever towards himself.
Yes.
And about his own performance.
throwing
Yeah,
that
he
bat.
was all whenever he beat up at that water cooler, it was because he had failed somehow
Yeah.
and felt
Well,
he was letting the team down. He was never a bad teammate or riding other guys.
Yeah.
So to be that aggressive but only self-reflected,
Yep.
okay, I can be down
Well,
with that.
even in '96 when they had that massive fight where like Strawberry, right, when
Yeah.
Straw came out of the dugout swinging the bat, like you could see Paul O'Neill like remove himself from that fight.
Yeah.
But that fight was epic. That was
That's a
probably
great
one of the
fight.
best infield fights I've ever seen.
Yeah. No, that's Yankees Orioles.
Yeah, and I was
I think it
living
was.
in Maryland at the time on the Eastern Shore, and I was wearing a Yankees hat, and I would get stuff thrown at me out of car
Yeah.
windows.
That was Armando Benitez hit Tino right in the back.
Yep.
And
yep.
he had done it earlier.
Yep.
So this was round 2. And yeah, most baseball fights are pretty disappointing, but that's a big one. That's the
that
Royal Rumble
yeah.
of MLB fights. Yeah.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, everybody in the chat, for hanging out with us for 3 awesome hours. You guys are the best. And thank you again, sir.
We'll see you later.
Everybody have a great night. Woo, yo, Joe.
Bye.